where today we shall be continuing the discussion from the portion of air pollution where we left off yesterday. So, what is it that we covered yesterday? So, if you recall, yesterday we had initiated the discussion from the portion of wetlands. We tried to understand what these wetlands are, what are the various different purposes, and what are the various different functionalities of these particular wetlands. How is it that they help us conserve the urban environment as well as the natural ecosystem of any particular area? Now, please understand that in these wetlands, what we discussed as, for example, if you let's suppose carry out construction in these wetland areas, then it can lead to a lack of groundwater recharge, it can lead to urban flooding. All these aspects can also be utilized in your geography answers when you write the answer in paper 1 about, let's suppose, the issues of urban flooding, the issues of urban construction, etc. There, feel free to use the portions that you have been given an idea about here. The portions that you have gained from here, it would be a grave injustice on your part if, let's suppose, you are maintaining this particular portion separate, portion of geography separate. You should have the tenacity, you should have the ability to try to interrelate the different concepts and then weave your answers. Now, in the case of the wetlands, then we understood, or then we took a look into what was the Ramsar Convention. There we basically traced the Ramsar Convention all the way from the 1962 Mar Conference. We understood what is Montreal's record. And when we talk about this Ramsar Convention, what are the Ramsar sites? What is the conference of parties for Ramsar Convention? They meet every 3 years. Last meeting was held in Wuhan, in China. Now, there we also looked at what is the wise use principle of the Ramsar Convention. Wise use principle means basically utilizing the various different components or ecosystem services provided by the wetlands, but doing it in a sustainable manner so that there is not significant damage caused. Now, then after that, we looked at the Amrit Dharohar scheme and the various different Ramsar sites that you find in the country. That is something that we looked at with the help of the map. Then we looked at the mangroves. What are these mangroves? And when we talk about these mangroves, then, for example, what are the various adaptations that these mangroves go through in order to adapt to a standing water ecosystem? So they go through, or many of them, they form adventitious roots. They go for a viviparous mode of reproduction. Then they have pneumatophores that they have developed. The leaves have got a separate salt secreting glands within them. Then after that, we looked at the various ecosystem services provided by these mangroves, where we observed that these mangroves, from the portion of providing wood to the supporting the wide biodiversity, also helps in significantly storing and capturing carbon dioxide and carbon compounds from the atmosphere. There we also observed that how these regions of mangroves, they are facing a kind of a threat from expansion or extension of agriculture, from wood cutting activities, and also construction activities in the coastline. For the conservation of mangroves, we looked at the portion of the current affairs, where we looked at two of the important initiatives. One of the initiative which was launched by the government in this year's budget, that was the Mishti scheme. And then we looked at the international alliance, which was formed after last year's Conference of Parties Convention on Climate Change. That was basically the Mangrove Alliance for Climate, which was formed. Now, after this, we moved on into the marine aquatic systems, where we took a look into the photic zone, aphotic zone, and as well as what do we understand by the benthos and the benthic species. Few of the adaptations that the benthos they carry out in order to survive in the depths of the water. We understood why, what is the reason behind such a great significant amount of biodiversity in the continental shelf area. Then after that, we moved on to understand about the coral reefs. What do we understand by coral bleaching? Why is it that the corals are referred to as the tropical rainforest of the marine ecosystem? Now, under what conditions does the coral bleaching happen? And we observed the various different threats that the corals face across the world. We also looked at the classification of the corals into warm water corals and also the cold water corals. Then after that, we started looking into the aspect of cryomesh, biorock technology, and these methodologies in order to restore the degraded coral ecosystems in any particular area. If the coral ecosystems are degraded and disintegrated, or in any area, let's suppose the corals have died off, then how do you reintroduce the corals in that region? So we took a look at the biorock tech. We looked at the cryomesh also. Then after that, we moved on to understand the biogeochemical cycles. And biogeochemical cycles is basically where we looked at how is it that the planet recycles the nutrients that is utilized by the living species. Now, the recycling of the nutrients can happen with the help of the atmospheric circulation or the air movement. And that is what we have as the gaseous cycles. So, oxygen cycle, nitrogen cycle, water cycle, carbon cycle, these are all the part of the gaseous cycles. We also observe the fact that when we talk about these gaseous cycles, they are much more efficient and they happen over a very short time window. But then we also have what is known as the sedimentary cycle, for example, phosphorus cycle as well as the sulfur cycle. And in both of them, we observe that it is much of these elements, they get trapped within the rocks and they get trapped for a longer period of time. And it is not very efficient also, but that is how the recycling is done. Then we had proceeded upon the discussion of this portion of pollution, where we had initiated the discussion based upon the sources of pollution, where we talked about the indoor air pollution and also the outdoor air pollution. Now, what is it that we are going to do today? Today, basically, we are going to cover some of the very important topics with respect to your examination. That is basically, we will start slow and steady from the concept of primary and secondary pollutants. Then we will talk about pollutants near the ground surface, for example, the ground level ozone. What is that ground level ozone? How is it produced? Then how is it that that ground level ozone helps to produce photochemical smog, something that you observe in commonality almost amongst all the Indian cities? Photochemical smog is different from your normal smog and fog events that you experience. That is something that we are going to study. Then, after ground level ozone and photochemical smog, we are going to cover the portion why is it that the pollution is much more in the northern part of the country, where we will cover the issues such as stubble burning. Then, after that, we are going to cover the portion of ozone layer, the depletion of the ozone layer. Why does that happen? Which is the chemical reaction which actually initiates the depletion? In order to prevent the depletion, you had the Vienna Convention, and that Vienna Convention was followed by the Montreal Protocol. So we will look at the Montreal Protocol also. And then we will take a look at the Kigali Amendment. The Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol basically, again, provides a kind of a futuristic plan in order to repair the ozone hole. And we will also look into the fact that how the ozone layer is getting repaired. After that, we are going to move into the portion of water and land and noise pollution. And that is going to be our coverage. Okay. Now, let us initiate the discussion with the portion of these air pollutants, where we talk about the primary and secondary air pollutants. Now, when we talk about air pollutants, let's suppose you have the case of an automobile, a vehicle which is moving on the road, right? All of us, we move on the roads. All of us, we have witnessed the roads from our roads from our childhood days, where I'm sure all of you would be able to associate with those kind of images, where you have a dingy, rickety vehicle moving along the road, emitting much more smoke than even an industry can generate, right? So let's suppose one of these old dingy vehicles is moving on the road and it is emitting that black smoke consisting of nitrogen oxides, consisting of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, consisting of, let's suppose, sulfur dioxide, lead, benzene, etc. Now, all of that basically is emitted directly by the vehicle. It is directly emitted by the source of pollution. So those kind of pollutants, they come into the category of primary pollutants, being emitted directly from the source. But then, let's suppose these vehicles, they release the some of the gases such as nitrous oxide, nitrogen oxide, dioxide, etc., they end up reacting with the atmospheric oxygen. They end up forming ozone, let's suppose. Or let's suppose that nitrous oxide or nitrogen dioxide, it reacts and it ends up forming, let's suppose, nitric acid. Sulfur dioxide reacts with water to form sulfuric acid. Now, in both these cases, the pollutants which have been emitted, they have reacted with other compounds present there and formed a different kind of pollutant altogether. So those come under the category of secondary pollutants. So when we talk about primary pollutants, they are the ones, these are the contaminants of the pollutants emitted directly from the source itself. When we talk about secondary pollutants, these are the ones where many of the primary pollutants, they combine with each other, they stay in the same region for a long time, they react with each other, and then eventually they generate another different kind of a compound that is a secondary pollutant, right? So here, when we talk about the primary pollutants, these are the ones emitted directly from source. Example, you have, for example, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, nitrous oxide, right? Then, for example, you have particulate matter, particulate matter. Now, what is this particulate matter? So, particulate matter basically stems from the term particles. So, when you have the, for example, industries, the older industries which operate like the brick kilns, where from a very far away distance you can see the black smoke and the black plumes rising up from the chimney. Or let's suppose, again, one of those older three-wheelers or the auto rickshaws that you have, which carries a lot of load and basically it behaves like a rocket engine, where if it moves this much distance, it will emit that much amount of smoke. So even in those areas, if you observe, there are multiple particles also which are released by the exhaust in that case, right? If ever you have taken a look at the exhaust pipe of your vehicle, your car or your motorbike or your scooter, any of those, if you have taken a look at the exhaust pipe when the exhaust pipe is cooler, and if you happen to run your fingers through it, you will basically find small fine particles getting deposited on your fingers basically. So that is particulate matter. That is the particle which is emitted. When the hydrocarbons such as coal, petroleum, etc., they do not burn completely off, then you have some amount of partially burnt, unburned hydrocarbons, carbon in itself, black carbon as it is referred to, they are also released. Now, they are also referred to as suspended particulate matter. They are also referred to as residual suspended particulate matter. But nowadays, the classification that you see is basically going to be PM5, PM2.5, PM5. PM here stands for particulate matter, PM10, right? PM10 largely includes the dust particles, etc., which are emanated. So what is this 2.5, 5, and 10? Basically, these end up representing the size of the size of the pollutant which is released. So when we say PM 2.5, we are talking about a pollutant which has got a size of 2.5 microns, right? When we say PM 10, we are talking about those pollutants which have a size of around 10 microns, right? So all these are constantly emitted into the atmosphere from the sources themselves. Now, if you apply your logic here, which is going to be much more dangerous, PM 2.5, PM 5, or PM 10 out of all of these? It is good. PM 2.5 will always be much more dangerous not PM10 or PM5. Why that is the case? Because in our nostrils, in our entire respiratory tract, you have various different mucous membranes. You would have studied it in your elementary biology in your school days, that you have the mucus and the mucosa membrane inside your respiratory tract. So when you try to inhale these larger particles, PM10, the mucous membrane, etc., they will trap that, right? So they will trap that. They won't allow that PM10 to get inside and into the portion of your lungs, right? But when we talk about PM2.5, these are so very small that these escape detection by your respiratory system. So this PM2.5 directly starts settling in your lungs, in your bronchi area and the bronchial area. This leads to, in certain cases, issues of bronchitis. And in many of the cases, the lungs, where these deposits, they keep continue to happen. These lungs, they get punctured, their capacity to regenerate. Because what is the functionality of lungs? The lungs basically are those centers where you have the uh, gases which are exchanged, right? The blood takes fresh oxygen and gives out the carbon dioxide, etc. The used gases from the body is given out in the lungs, and then you exhale it out. So if these start getting deposited in the portion of your lungs, what is the implication of it? That your body's entire system, circulatory system, starts becoming inefficient. And why is that? That is primarily because in your entirety of the body structure, now the lungs, they are not able to exchange that much amount of fresh oxygen with the blood. And that is why the cells of the body don't get that much amount of blood supply. So that is why PM2.5 can cause long-term illnesses. That is the reason why it is always said Delhi is one of those areas which always basically prominently comes in the news stories, right? Everywhere that you look around, everybody will be talking about Delhi and nothing else. But it is not only restricted, the problem of pollution in India is not only restricted to the region of Delhi. In fact, in the entirety of the northern belt, the northern Indo-Gangetic belt, you will find that the level of pollution in these months is extraordinarily high, right? And that is why you will find that majority of the citizenry who are living there, and those of you who have been living in the regions such as Delhi, Amritsar, Ludhiana, Lucknow, Chandigarh, now, God forbid, but if ever you will have to go for a medical check or a medical examination, the doctors will be able to figure out very easily. And they will ask you that pointed question that, okay, have you lived in Delhi for a long period of time? Because the lungs, they start to take a beating, right? Your capacity to inhale and exhale, that starts to take a beating. So that is why, with this pollution which is happening, we are endangering the future of the citizenry and what we refer to as the human capital, where humans, we are a resource, right? Basically, we have the potential to bring about change. So that human capital of the society is getting impacted by the pollution. Okay. Now, could you please explain about the particulate matter? So what was I doing till now? Okay. Maybe you would have joined late, my dear friend. But we have already talked about particulate matter. Particulate matter is basically the particles which are emitted when the pollution happens. It is of various size, 10, 2.5 and 5. 2.5 is the dangerous one. Now, when we talk about the secondary air pollutants, these basically are the pollutants which are produced after the primary pollutants, they interact, they stay in the atmosphere for a long time, and then they form a newer compound, right? So here they are produced when pollutants emitted by the sources react and interact with other compounds to produce newer pollutants. Example, you will have nitric acid, sulfuric acid, then you also have, for example, ozone, right, etc. Okay, by the way, before I forget, an announcement for everyone that in this evening environment batch, the last session is, I hope you are aware of the concept that we have initiated the doubt clearing session. So the last session, which is scheduled on next Thursday, will be your doubt clearing session. So in order to make up for that, we will have an extra session this Saturday. In the evening, in the same time, we will have an extra session on this Saturday. So on this Saturday, you will have an extra class for the portion of environment ecology, so that the last session, we will keep it separately and purely for the doubt clearing processes. Okay, the same timing will be there. You will have received the notification, and before you have another question that you shoot out, what is the time, when is the time, which Saturday are you talking about, this year or next year, is it for environment ecology, etc. Again, listen to this carefully. This Saturday, that is on 2nd, in the evening 5 to 8:30, we will have an environment session. Okay, and that will be in order to finish our syllabus slightly before time, so that the last session can be taken up purely for doubt solving. Okay, I hope there is no particular doubt in that. Okay, please undertake email doubts firstly. Vivek, yesterday also you had sent a mail that written the message that I have sent an email. Send a reminder for that, Vivek. I have not been able to find your things. Okay, then I will take the email. But rather but I hope we are aware that in the doubt session, I hope everybody is aware that that doubt session won't be a randomized fish market of sorting. You are required to send mails to us. I think that is what Vivek is alluring to. So you have to send a mail to us at IS Live with a subject heading about the doubt clearing session. Well, basically, as we move ahead, it will be clarified to you, and then after that, those particular questions will be taken up first. Right after those complete questions are exhausted, then if we have the scope, we'll take up any other question if possible. Okay, right? Okay, send a reminder over, Anurag. Understand, guys, on a daily basis we get around 100 120 students, they send a mail, so there are chances that few of the mails they basically get ignored, but it is not intentional. Kindly send a reminder. If we, Chandrasekhar, if we cutting the plant after we feel certain bit of smell, that is pain of plant smell, and give signaling around the plant. If we cutting the plant after we feel certain bit of smell, that is pain of plant smell, and give signaling around the plant, how it is possible? So basically, Chandrasekhar, what you are talking about is the fact that the plants, when basically they are cut up. So I have not followed this latest news article, but in fact, if you even take a look at the earlier findings done in the 50s and 60s, where you had J.C. Bose, etc., when they carried out the finding to indicate that the plants actually had or responded to various different stimuli. So this has been a research going on for a long period of time to find out whether the plants also they have the feelings or not. And in fact, if you follow the story of evolution, I'm sure, but the problem is that in our childhood days, where in the school we are not taught about evolution a lot, we are not taught about Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection a lot. But basically, when we talk about the theory of evolution, you will find out that the plants themselves, they are very very responsive to the outside stimuli. They feel the pain also, and they feel the hostility around them also, and that is when they basically react to it. As I told you, for many hundreds of millions of years, the planet was having the plants, but these plants could not grow further. You had microscopic leaves which were present. The moment these plants, all of them, they realized that there is not that much of a threat, that is when they started growing, right? There you had evolution of lignin, and the plants, they started growing taller and taller. So always there has been this research ever since the time of JC Bose. There has been the research about it. But then if you are alluring to a particular news article, the Hindu analysis about green leaf volatility will follow it up. Okay, and when we cut plant, a chemical compound is released known as green leaf volatile, which is the smell we sense. Yes, that is the case. And I think they are trying to protect themselves. Not all the plants, they have the ability to do that, but few of the plants definitely have the ability to protect themselves. They start secreting certain chemicals immediately if they sense a danger. And also you will find the case of the flowering plants also. Now flowering plants and their evolution is also very different story altogether. Right, nowadays you find that almost 70 to 80% of all the plant species in the world, they are flowering plants. Think about it. At one point of time, these were very rare, right? But the moment they sense that this is the way to go, so the plants also are intelligent species out there. We just need to carry out more researches. For example, you would have heard about the flower Rafflesia, one of the largest flowers in the world. Now that Rafflesia immediately starts emitting very foul smell when it basically blooms and blossoms, right? So that is the case about the plant and the plant intelligence in order to attract the various species, how they behave, how they attract, and how they have started becoming carnivores. Think about it, the plants becoming carnivores, right? So it is said that long time back in history, you had much more plants who were carnivorous in their nature. And okay, so now we move ahead with the aspect of this particular pollution. And here basically we talk about the aspect that when we have the air pollution, it impacts people across the world. It is not only restricted to a certain area. And that is where these data pointers will come to your rescue. Here, if you observe this, this is for your answer writing ability, so that you are able to reproduce these data pointers in the answers. And this data pointer does not change on a daily basis. For example, if we talk about that in Southeast Asia region, over 2 million people are impacted by air pollution. It is not as if in 2024 this number will change to 3 million. This is a broader estimate about the number of people who are suffering from or suffering due to from various ailments due to the impact of pollution. Now, whenever you hear about the term of air pollution or the impact of air pollution, mostly it will have an impact in your respiratory system, and it will lead to cardiovascular issues. For example, heart attacks, right? For example, bronchitis, asthma, right? So that tracheal infection. So cardiovascular issues will be there. Then you will have respiratory illnesses, heart disease, lung cancer. And then there are also chances of a stroke happening. So I don't particularly suggest to you that start learning all the facts that nitrogen dioxide causes which kind of an issue or carbon dioxide causes which kind of an ailment. Have a generalistic approach that respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular issues, and stroke. And always understand, and this is a kind of a thing that you should basically develop the smarts about, that if ever you find yourself in the situation where you are in the mains examination, you have to write the impact or the diseases caused by any air pollutant, immediately write they are carcinogenic in nature. Carcinogenic means they are cancer causing, right? So most of the air pollutants that are there, they have the propensity, they have the ability to cause cancer, lung cancer, and various different types of respiratory illnesses, right? Now here in Southeast Asian region, here you have 2 million people in the Southeast Asian region which get impacted. Even over the area of western part of Pacific, that is across the region of China and parts of Korea, you have around 2 million people getting impacted there also. So these are the data pointers that you should keep in mind. There is no point remembering how many people in Africa get impacted by air pollution. You should have an idea about South Asia and Southeast Asia. Okay. And now, the principal air pollutants, the majority of the air pollutants that we find around us. So carbon compounds. That is, when we say carbon compounds, we talk about carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and even methane. At one point of time in our history, we had the atmosphere. Presently, when you see, take a look at planet Earth, the image of planet Earth from outside, right? From the spaceships, etc., when they send the image, it is almost transparent. The atmosphere is almost transparent, isn't it? You are able to see the blue planet. But it was not always so. At one point of time, this methane, it dominated the entirety of the atmosphere so significantly due to volcanic eruption. It became almost impossible, and life, that is why, could not sustain itself. At that point of time, you could not have any life which could sustain itself on the land areas. So methane is a significant amount of pollutant, and methane is released naturally as well. Methane not necessarily is released by the humans themselves, they are released naturally also. For example, let's suppose you leave certain amount of organic compounds out there in order to help decomposition process take place. Now that will also release methane. Okay. And for example, let's suppose when we consider certain animals such as the cattle, the bovine animals that you have, right? Now, in those animals, you would have seen basically there is a lot of gas buildup. And there also they end up releasing methane continuously. That is why when the animals, they are taken for slaughter, whenever the animals are taken for slaughter, that releases huge amount of methane. Agricultural activities releases huge amount of methane, right? In areas where you find marshes and, for example, peatlands, now there, as the water evaporates, it releases huge amount of methane. Okay, so methane is basically trapped in the organic compounds which are there, and that methane is released time and time again, both from human sources also and natural sources also. Carbon dioxide is released in the process of any combustion, because when you burn something, generally you will be burning carbon compounds, right? Most of the compounds, most of the all the sources of fuel, basically they are carbon compounds, the traditional sources. So when you burn them, you have carbon dioxide which is released. Carbon dioxide is also produced naturally. During volcanic events, you have carbon dioxide which is produced naturally, right? And what about carbon monoxide? Carbon monoxide, when we talk about, these are basically released when there is partial combustion. Not a complete burning happens, but a partial combustion. Carbon monoxide enters your respiratory tract, and from the lungs, it goes into the bloodstream. Carbon monoxide is also colorless, by the way. It is also colorless, and it is very dangerous. You inhale it, it goes into your lungs. If the concentration starts to increase, that is when it will start combining with the blood. And that is when the blood's ability to carry oxygen, etc., significantly reduces, almost goes out of the window. The blood starts turning pink, right? And in fact, nowadays you don't see that. Nowadays you have a tradition of having room heaters. You have the tradition, or you have, at least the technology is available, where you have centralized heating in many of the buildings, apartments, offices, etc. And now we know better also. But if you would take the clock back around 15 years, 20 years ago, you would come across numerous stories, numerous, almost every winter. You would come across 5 to 10 stories easily in every region, where you will find news stories which go like that: 5 people found dead in their room while they were sleeping because of carbon monoxide poisoning. 10 people, they died, and they basically were sleeping out, and they died due to carbon monoxide poisoning. So what would happen was that in order to carry out the process of warming, people would burn coal stoves, right? They would keep the stoves burning, and coal they would put into it, so that slight amount of heat would be produced. They would close the room in order to get the warmth, And that is where these coal stoves were used quite significantly. But then it was realized later upon that over a period of few hours, the buildup of carbon monoxide in these rooms that happens so significantly that you have the carbon monoxide poisoning, and that causes death. Now, when you go out into the open, and when you have these vehicular emissions, etc., or in fact, anywhere that you see something burning, right? And if it is pungent, if it is hard to inhale, there will be carbon monoxide. Partial burning wherever will be there, there will be carbon monoxide released. And that always causes long-term damage. Okay. So these are basically, you had, these are the carbon compounds. There was no chimney system. Chimney system is a luxury, my dear friend, right? Chimney system is a kind of a luxury which, because in order to build a chimney also, you only build that in drawings generally, or in cold places. In other places, for example, in the region of Punjab, why would you have houses with a chimney? That is not required. You don't have the concept of the firewood burning, right? So that is why people would keep these stoves indoor, and they would lock the houses. That is what would lead to so many deaths happening. Now you don't find that happening, because now the people are well aware. If you ask your parents about it, right, they would have an idea about it, and they would tell you why they don't do that anymore, because of these particular events of carbon monoxide poisoning. China also suffered from this, in fact. In fact, almost all the countries, the Western countries that you find so very developed now, around 50, 60 years back, they were the ones suffering from all these issues, or 70 years back. In fact, the very infamous London smog in 1952, where due to the condition of temperature inversion, the entire pollutant mass of the region of London continued to stay in the lower atmosphere, and people were forced to inhale that. At that point of time, coal burning and coal stove burning was very common in London. And all of them, they were forcibly inhaling a lot of carbon monoxide. And that is what led to such massive casualties in London. And many people were, hundreds of people were hospitalized. So that monoxide poisoning is not new to any particular part. It is something which is a part and parcel of every country's journey you will take a look into. Okay. So combustion of fossil fuels, that leads to emission of carbon compounds. Sulfur compounds, that is generally in the form of sulfur dioxide. Sulfur compounds are released generally in the form of sulfur dioxide. They are released from the industries, the thermal power plants when you burn coal, and also, well, for example, burning of fossil fuels also, right? So burning of fossil fuels also, of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels as in coal, petroleum, or natural gas, when you burn them, there also these sulfur compounds are emitted. That is why you have basically in almost all the vehicles nowadays, you have the catalytic converters. I hope we are aware of this term. Catalytic converters. Almost in all the vehicles, you have this device, you have this instrument, which is referred to as a catalytic converter. Now, what a catalytic converter actually does, it ensures that you don't have that much amount of sulfur, nitrate compound, lead compound, benzene, which is released in the exhaust of the vehicle. So they basically have a filtrate system where they trap these pollutants, right? So you would have heard about the various different stages of vehicles, or the requirement of vehicles. Bharat stage 4, before that it was Bharat stage 3, now it is Bharat stage 6, or international standard in Europe, for example, Euro 3, Euro 4, Euro 5. So all these emission standards that you see on the back of the vehicles, which is basically stuck on the back of the vehicles, that represents which kind of catalytic converter is there. For example, in the Bharat stage 6, the catalytic converters that we have, that basically aims to reduce that amount of sulfur emission even furthermore. Now, sulfur is also emitted from natural sources. Remember that. Sulfur is emitted from the natural sources such as volcanic eruption. And also, is released by the microbes. You have many microbes which end up releasing dimethyl sulfide, for example, DMS, as it is known as. So that also leads to the discharge of sulfur into the atmosphere. It is this sulfur dioxide, by the way, which stays up in the atmosphere. It interacts with the water droplets of the rain, forms sulfuric acid, and that is what we call as acid rain. We will cover that acid rain portion also. Then we talk about the nitrogen oxides. Nitrogen oxides are of different types. So you have most common amongst them nitrogen dioxide and N2O. Right. So these are released from the automobiles, power plants, industries, agricultural activities, all of them. They release these nitrogenous compounds. They also cause the same issues of cardiovascular problems and also respiratory illnesses. Now, ozone. Now, ozone is an example of a secondary pollutant. By the way, we are not talking about the ozone that you see in the stratosphere. That is regarded as a good ozone. We are talking about the ozone which is produced near the ground surface. That is significantly harmful, right? If you end up inhaling ozone, that is very harmful because of the reactions that it can undertake. So that ozone is a secondary pollutant which is largely produced due to human activities. We'll take a look at the ground level ozone, what it is. Then you have fluorocarbons, right? For example, CFCs, HCFCs, chlorofluorocarbon, hydrochlorofluorocarbon, bromochlorofluorocarbon. So then you have HFC themselves. So all of them are also pollutants. So basically earlier you had all the refrigeration units, all the air conditioning units, the cold storage systems, the freezing systems, all of them. They would use these fluorocarbons as coolants. Even in fire extinguishers, you had the fluorochlorocarbons which were used as a kind of a coolant, and in this case of fire extinguisher, as a solvent. Now, as a consequence of that, these fluorocarbons, when you inhale it, obviously they will be poisonous, but they have the ability to stay in the atmosphere for a very long period of time without getting impacted. And that is when, with the air circulation, they carry on and they are carried to the region of stratosphere. And these fluorocarbons, they interact with the ozone. They break the ozone molecule. And this is responsible for the creation of a large ozone hole also. Okay. And then particulate matter, we have discussed. Particulate matter we have discussed are of three types rather, PM2.5, PM5, and PM10. Now, amongst those particulate matter in the category of PM2.5, you have one of those particulate matter which we refer to as black carbon. Black carbon, most of you would have experienced black carbon or would have seen black carbon. Basically, if you have ever seen an oil lamp in your childhood days, where by kerosene, burning of kerosene, you basically light up a lamp. I don't know how many of you have seen that, but in those cases where if you would have kept your hand or the palm above that oil lamp, you had black deposits. It would be as if the hand has gone black, but if you rub it, then it will come off. So that means it had very fine particles. So that was black carbon. If you burn, for example, paper, a lot of paper near maybe a wall, your wall starts blackening. You would have noticed that the wall starts blackening in an area. Now, if you rub that with a kind of a fine piece of cloth or a wet cloth, you'll find that the cloth basically accumulates that black portion. That is your black carbon. Black carbon, etc. This also comes under the category of short-lived climate pollutants. Means they don't have the ability to stay in the atmosphere for a long time. They will get deposited on some or the other surface within 2 to 3 weeks at max. They will get deposited somewhere or the other, right? That is why In areas, for example, if ever you have been to uh, well, now you don't need to go into the coal regions and the coal mining areas to experience black carbon. Any of the urban cities, you leave a good outside, any of your items you leave outside the door for some days or a few days, maybe 10 days, you will observe a kind of a blackish deposit on them. Right? Majority of the Indian cities are going through that phase. That is your black carbon. We have been so capable and we are so very industrious in nature. The mighty Himalayas, the formation of which in itself is a kind of a mighty miracle, which has influenced life in this subcontinent beyond reckoning. We should be proud that we have made black carbon deposits all over the region of the Himalayas now. Now that those Himalayan ranges, they have these black carbon deposits. Can you think about the irony of it all? Now, as a consequence of that, what has happened is that on these ice masses, once you have this black deposit, what happens is they start absorbing more heat. Ice is very white, right? So it has got reflective nature. So that is why ice normally absorbs very little amount of heat. Hence, it remains frozen. But then, when you deposit black carbon on top of that, ice is no longer white anymore. It becomes dark brownish to black. That means it starts absorbing sunlight. And what it leads to? Melting of ice. So the melting of the Himalayan glaciers and the snow in the region of Himalayas can also be attributed to the black carbon deposits that we are polluting the air, and the air circulation is carrying those black carbon in those areas. So what is the remedy of this? Where is that black carbon getting released from? Again, the next time that you venture out on the road, remember those old vehicles. Look at those old vehicles. Look at the black smoke that they emit. For every meter that they move, they emit 1 ton of smoke almost. Right? So that is your black carbon. The over the industries that you see the black smoke emitting, that is your black carbon. So that black carbon gets emitted from the industrial source, from your transportation sector, from the older power plants also. Many of the power plants have been so very old and they continue to function almost with impurity. So that is where the black carbon is coming from, and it is very, very dangerous. And those of you who have been born, brought up, and raised in a coal mining area, well, you would have experienced black carbon like no one else. Basically, in the coal mining area, in the region of coal mines, if you go through or walk through the entire area with any kind of shirt, any kind of a cloth, by evening time, you will have that blackish tinge on the cloth. So that is how prominent black carbon is. That is why in the earlier mining towns, now you have protective instruments, etc. In earlier mining towns, for example, in the portion of Western Europe, in the portion of United States, the average life expectancy of people living in these mining areas and the mining workers used to be around 30 years, 32 years. That is it. Right? Because they would continuously be inhaling that black carbon, particles of that carbon, coal, etc. And they would suffer from black lung disease, where the lungs would get punctured eventually. And you had you basically had people dying from respiratory illnesses at a very young age. That is due to this reason, many of the mining towns in Western Europe, in US, have been abandoned prematurely because so many deaths would happen. Thankfully, in India, we have never experienced that because of the protective instruments. And also now we know better. Now, water is significantly used during these mining processes in order to get that pollutants and the particulate matter deposited on the ground surface. Now, this is a list for your revision purposes. So basically, this is about the various different pollutants and the sources from which they are getting emitted. Right? Now, all of them you will observe that it impacts your lungs, your breathing capacity. When the lungs will get impacted, then the ability to exchange gases, that gets impacted. So the pumping rate of your heart, that gets impacted. Then, for example, you will observe that it creates some of the other ailments also, where other organs also keep on getting impacted. Okay. Now, after this, we move to a portion which UPSC has asked multiple times, and that is ground ozone. So when we talk about ozone primarily is classified into two types. That is good ozone and bad ozone. What is ozone, by the way? Ozone is O3. Three atoms of oxygen, they combine to form ozone. Right. Now, good ozone is the ozone that you have in the region of stratosphere. Why it is good ozone? Because that ozone layer filters out the ultraviolet rays of the sun, doesn't allow the ultraviolet rays of the sun to penetrate and come onto the ground surface. So protects the ground surface, because all the various species, be it the plants, be it us humans, or be it the other animals, when they are exposed to ultraviolet rays of the sun, they will be significantly impacted. And please understand that is because our bodies have evolved in such a manner where we have never experienced that threat of ultraviolet rays of the sun. Long time back in history, that was not always the case. You did have a lack of ozone layer in the stratosphere, and ultraviolet rays of the sun would reach the ground surface long time back in the history. That is why the land was almost lifeless in those times. And the species which would evolve would only be those species who could survive in those. Right? Now, you don't have those species anymore. Now we are the evolved form. So when we get exposed to ultraviolet rays, we immediately have, not immediately like you see in the cartoons, not like that, but basically a small time exposure or a periodic exposure leads to skin lesions, and skin infections also happen. Many of the times it leads to skin cancer happening in the various different areas. So here, when we talk about good ozone, that is stratospheric ozone, because it filters out the UV rays. What is this bad ozone? So it is a secondary pollutant which is also referred to as tropospheric ozone, which is produced in the troposphere as a result of volatile organic compounds such as benzene, etc. When they interact, that is when this bad ozone is produced. So that is basically tropospheric ozone. Okay. Rishan Dondor, can carbon monoxide enter the room? In my experience, if I closed the window, I felt sleepy. As a candidate, by the way, everybody feels sleepy. When you are preparing for civil services, hardly a day goes by where you don't feel sleepy. But having said that, on a more serious note, obviously that can happen. And in this particular season, these pollutants, they tend to stay closer to the ground surface. But then being sleepy is not something which is an aberration in the life of a UPSC candidate. Whenever you pick up any subject like a geography or art and culture, if you don't feel sleepy, you should actually reward yourself. Now then, when we talk about this ozone, so it is this bad ozone which is produced at the region of ground level. And it is a secondary kind of a pollutant. So how is that produced? Let us take a look into that. So, but ozone layer exists between stratosphere and troposphere? Absolutely not, my dear friend. Ozone layer exists in the region of stratosphere at a height of 20 to 40, 45 kilometers. That is where the ozone layer exists. Now, when we say the ground level ozone, so you have a concoction of these pollutants which interact, which react with each other, and thereby they produce the ground level ozone. So what are these pollutants? So basically, you will find nitrous oxide, nitrogen oxides, plus volatile organic compounds. What are your volatile organic compounds? Volatile organic compounds which basically readily change their state, which are very, very reactive. For example, in case, because from our childhood days, we never see that, okay, this is the volatile organic compound. You would have all witnessed or experienced at some point of time or other in your life a freshly painted furniture, right? All of you recall that. I hope you recall that. I hope somewhere in your latent memory you have that, a freshly painted furniture. And then when you inhale that, right, you have that unique kind of a smell that you don't find it anywhere else generally, that kind of a smell that you associate with spirits or, for example, oil, right? So those are your organic compounds which are ready to react with any of the compound that they find. So they are very reactive, they change their state very easily. Or simplest of the example that you can relate to, when you go to the fuel pump, you get your motorbike, your bike, or your car, anything, you get it fueled up. Now, in that fuel pump itself, now, even if you enter there and you are not directly in contact with that, you have a unique smell in the petrol pump or the fuel pump or the gas station. Not gas station so much, but the petrol pumps. Now, where is that smell coming from? If petroleum diesel is liquid, where is that smell coming from? Have you thought about it? So within that, or in that crude oil or in that petroleum, you also have compounds which readily vaporize, evaporate, and then they persist in the atmosphere. They can react readily with any particular compound in the atmosphere, right? So you have basically fumes which get emitted if you leave petroleum outside or kerosene oil outside. Now you would have observed that even if it is a liquid, you'll be able to smell it from far away. Why? Because you have many of the compounds which basically immediately they tend to evaporate, because that is how eager these compounds are to change their state. They can change their state almost immediately. That is why the term volatile. Organic, why? Because they have the carbohydrate structure present in them. They basically also have the benzene ring structure present. That is why the organic compound is referred to. So these nitrous oxide or nitrogen oxides, they react with the volatile organic compounds that are produced by us humans, by, let's suppose, these paintings or these turpentine finishes that you give on the furniture from the fuel effervescence that comes out. Now they react in the presence of heat and sunlight, they react, and then they produce ozone as a resultant of it. So that is basically your ground level ozone. This ozone that you observe, this particular ozone that you observe is produced on the ground level, on the ground. Okay. So this is the bad ozone, is not emitted directly into the air, but is created by the chemical reactions between nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds in the presence of heat and sunlight. So this is a must, right? That heat and sunlight is a must. Now, where is it that these emissions come from? So emissions from industrial facilities, electrical utilities, motor vehicle exhaust, gasoline vapors that I was talking about, chemical solvents which are used in your furniture stops, etc. And these are the major sources of nitrogen oxides and VOCs. Okay, so that is how this ground level ozone is produced. These ground level ozone, or the ozone produced at the ground level, that is what we inhale. It is a secondary pollutant. But if this ground level ozone is produced in significant quantity, and if it stays there, it can fuel further reactions with the unburnt hydrocarbons from the exhaust, etc. And those reactions which are undertaken, they produce a kind of a brownish haze over the cities. The brownish haze over the cities, something which almost all the Indian cities are now associated with. This brownish haze that is formed, this is also what is photochemical smog. So that gets formed when this ground level ozone stays there for a longer period of time, and then that interacts with the other kind of pollutants, such as the unburnt residue of various different hydrocarbons. We will take a look at that particular reaction also. So here, ground level ozone is basically a colorless and highly irritating gas that forms just above the Earth's surface. It is called a secondary pollutant. because it is produced when the primary pollutants, they stay in the same region for a longer period of time and they interact. Now these two primary pollutants are what? Nitrogen oxide and volatile organic compounds. 95% of nitrogen oxide comes from the human activities such as burning of coal, gasoline and oil in motor vehicles, homes, industries and power plants. Volatile organic compounds, they come from gasoline combustion. When we have when I say marketing of gasoline, it is not that the advertisement of petrol that you see you will get VOCs released. No. For example, the distribution centers like the petrol pumps, the fuel stations, etc., upstream oil and gas production, there also volatile organic compounds are produced. Residential wood combustion, evaporation of liquid fuel and solvent. So significant quantities of VOCs, they also originate from the natural sources, but it is in very little amount. Maximum amount of these VOCs, they are released from these human or anthropogenic sources. Okay, so that is what ends up forming the various different kinds of ground level ozone. Why it is organic in nature? What is volatile organic compound? When we talk about petroleum, is that organic or inorganic? What do you think? Petroleum. It is organic. Yes. So there also, when you have fumes of petroleum getting emanated, why do we say petroleum is organic? Is it because from our childhood days we have seen petroleum is organic, etc.? Petroleum, you have the hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons. That is what makes it organic in nature. So when we talk about hydrocarbons, they are generally organic. So volatile organic compounds will have a lot of hydrocarbons. All of them have hydrocarbons. Coniferous forests, they release a lot of these VOCs also. Yes, very good. For example, your cheer pines that you see, majority of the conifers, for example, now they release or secrete some amount of sticky fuel or sticky oil from their leaves, right? That is why in the region of coniferous forest fires are so very common, because in dry conditions you will have that oil that they secrete, it sticks on the branches and it simply lights up. So there, while this oil and this discharge secretion is happening, these VOCs are released from the conifers also. That is true. And that is why in regions such as Sikkim, we are using these coniferous forest in order to produce biofuel also. But sir, ozone is good for our lives. Why? Why is ozone good for our lives? Who told you that ozone is good for our lives? It is, you say it is good. Why? Because it filters out ultraviolet rays. Only that is the reason. Otherwise, ozone has got no particular role to play in our own body functionality and our own body system. So why do they filter out ultraviolet rays? Because of their atomic structure. Now, on the ground surface, it is not as if the ozone has got some kind of energy giving mechanism that you have an inhalation of ozone and suddenly you are recharged for life. It is not like that. It is not an elixir of life. So the only reason we say ozone is virtuous because they are filtering out ultraviolet rays. But on the ground surface, they don't filter out ultraviolet rays. They don't solve that purpose, because on the ground surface, if on the ground surface here you have ozone, let's suppose, ultraviolet rays are filtered out. But who will benefit from that? Nobody. But as an individual, you are standing here, you are inhaling that continuously. So that will cause various different issues. You have respiratory illnesses, breathing difficulties, asthma, cold, pneumonia, all of them are caused by that. Okay. Now, then we talk about the photochemical smog. Photochemical means what? In the presence of sunlight, you have a chemical reaction which is triggered. Again, ground level ozone has to be produced first of all. So you have various contaminants which produce not only the ground level ozone, but that also goes ahead to react significantly to produce a chemical compound which creates that brownish haze above the regions. And that is the compound that we are talking about is PAN. What is this PAN? peroxy acetyl nitrate. Proxy is different. Peroxy is different. Okay, so please, I understand it might be a typing error. Please don't write proxy. Proxy is something very different. So this is peroxyacetyl nitrate. So that peroxyacetyl nitrate that forms the brownish haze above most of the cities. In fact, right now, almost above the entirety of the Indo-Gangetic plains, majority of the regions, you will find this photochemical smog to be formed. Right. So photochemical smog is a mixture of pollutants that form when nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, they react to sunlight, creating a brown haze above cities. Now, I understand this definition appears to be very similar to what we have seen for the production of ground level ozone. But understand, ground level ozone production is a must when you have to, or when this peroxyacetyl nitrate formation happens. It tends to occur more often in summer, because that is when we have sunlight. Without sunlight, if the sunlight is not present in significant quantity, this photochemical smog can never be produced. That is why sunlight is a very vital, very important uh, input required for this. Okay, so how is it that ground level ozone initially is formed? So you have NO2 in the presence of sunlight. That basically NO2 disintegrates. You have NO plus oxygen radical. That oxygen radical reacts with oxygen O2 present in the air. It produces, this is the ground level ozone. Now, this ground level ozone that forms when this nitrogen dioxide reacts with the hydrocarbons, the residual hydrocarbons, unburnt, partial burnt residue hydrocarbons. When they react, they form PAN, peroxyacetyl nitrate. This is your PAN. Okay, so that is when this PAN which is produced, basically, that is what is forming a haze, a brownish haze above the regions. Now, main source of these hydrocarbons are the volatile organic compounds. Even, for example, agricultural activities sometimes end up releasing these organic compounds. Similarly, oxygenated organic and inorganic compounds, they react with nitric oxide rather, to produce more nitrogen oxides and other products. So that is why you basically have this production of this ground level ozone that you see. So this, or initially you have the ground level ozone which is produced. That ground level ozone in the presence of nitrogen oxides, that reacts further with the hydrocarbons, and that is what produces the PAN or peroxyacetyl nitrate, which is referred to as photochemical smog. Again, let me clarify, ground level ozone and photochemical smog, they are different. They are not the same. Please don't confuse them because both of them are produced as a result of nitrogen oxide and volatile organic compounds. The presence of nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compound in the presence of heat and sunlight, that is essential for the production of ground level ozone. The production of ground level ozone and further reactions with the hydrocarbon, that is essential to create that haze. Ground level ozone in itself will not form a smog. That ground level ozone, along with nitrogen oxides, along with the hydrocarbons, when they react, that is when you find this brownish haze above the cities, right? This is your smog, chemical smog. Okay, that is the portion of your photochemical smog. So it is different from your ground level ozone. UPSC has asked this question multiple times, both about ground level ozone as well as photochemical smog in the mains examination. So all that you need to do is whatever you have studied here, the sources from where they are emitted. Maybe if you are able to recall any of the reactions, fair enough. Even if you are not able to recall the reactions, just talk about what is that peroxyacetyl nitrate, what is the ground level ozone, why that reaction takes place, presence of sunlight is a must. That is more than sufficient. Now, then we come to another phenomena, what is referred to as acid rain. Now, unlike the perception that we have on our in our minds that acid rain, many of you have that perception. I see in the case of the doubts also. Acid rain, you feel about it, or when you think about it, the mind goes into the category that you have burning acid which is going to fall on the ground. Everybody will be burnt immediately. Right? That is a kind of a perception. Now, it is not like that. When you have pollutants such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide. Now, when these are emitted into the atmosphere, these stay in the atmosphere. In the atmosphere, they will interact with the vapor particles, water vapor particles. They will even interact with sometimes the presence of the dust particles, etc. So, when they interact with the vapor particles, sulfur dioxide produces a weak sulfuric acid, a diluted weak sulfuric acid. Right? Whereas NO2 will interact with vapor particles to produce a diluted or a weak nitric acid. Yes, Shalu, that is correct. So they will react to form the nitric acid. Now, these small particles of sulfuric acid, these small particles of nitric acid, they stay in the atmosphere because they are very small, they are light also. Sometimes what you have is the movement of the wind. That movement of the wind creates a situation where these diluted sulfuric acid particles, these diluted nitric acid particles, they get deposited due to the movement of the wind. Those are referred to as a dry deposit of acid rain. Sometimes what happens is that raindrops, they combine with them and then they fall on the surface. So that is the typical wet acid rain that you encounter. Now, by the way, it is again why I keep on harping back to the process of evolution is because we need to be very appreciative of the fact that we humans, we think so presumptively that everything is our own creation. Earth, the entire planet, has experienced acid rain for many millions of years before also. And many of the life forms, you had one of the phases where almost all the plants, they died because of this acid rain which happened. And at that point of time, where did these contaminants come from? Both of them were produced from volcanic eruptions, right? And also plant residues, etc. So you had a phase where you had a prolonged acid rain happening. And this was prior to the evolution of dinosaurs, prior to the Triassic age. Now, at that point of time, immediately all the plants in that region, they died. You had the growth of fungal species at that point of time once the acid rain abated. At that point of time, many of these plants, they started forming those deposits. The dead plants rather, they started forming those deposits. Because you know what happened was that the planet went through a phase of a couple of million years where initially you had acid rain. And then after that, followed by that, you had continuous amount of rainfall for a couple of million years. As a consequence of that, you had such a widespread flooding event across the land areas that many of these dead plants, they got piled up and there were further deposits on top of them. Those deposits, they solidified. And today, what are those deposits known as? Coal. So that is how in many of the areas coal formation was also initiated. But that is how the acid rain basically behaves. Now, in India, various different regions have experienced acid rain. One of the prime example of this, or the impact of acid rain, was the yellowing of Taj Mahal. Again, many of you would be very, very young to recall that about the entire fiasco which happened around the yellowing of Taj Mahal. But basically, and not such a long time back, had the Supreme Court not intervened, we had the capacity to destroy what Shah Jahan created in 22 long years. So it was found out that the Taj Mahal obviously is one of the most significantly beautiful architectural marvels, right? White marble is one of those prime qualities of the Taj, where it has got reflective properties under full moonlight, etc. So Taj was also always known for that. Now, at the time when it was being constructed, little was Shah Jahan, the innocent king, if you want to call him that, little was he aware about the fact that hundreds of years later, across the river Yamuna, across the other side of the Taj Mahal, the government would give permission to open brick kilns. Many of the industries started operating on the other side of river Yamuna. On one bank of river Yamuna, you have the Taj. On the other side of Yamuna, the state government had given the permit to open up many of the brick kilns, many of the small industries. Large industries, they are always regulated. Everybody has their attention on the large industries, that if they flout the norms, we will put them in jail immediately. Everybody, from common public to the government also. But it is these small industries which operate without regulation which create the pollution. So think about it. Not many people would have had that kind of a thinking or that kind of a flaunting ability where they could flaunt that, from my office space, I can see the Taj Mahal in a walking distance. These industries did operate for a long period of time. This was another case of the industrialist politician nexus that is very well known for in the entirety of the parts of the country. Now, that is when the Taj started becoming yellow. The white marble, they started getting yellow. Because this sulfuric acid in itself has got a yellowish nature. They would start getting deposited on them. Many of them would corrode the marble also. Thankfully, the Supreme Court stepped in, and Supreme Court immediately ordered the shutdown of the industries. Now that created a political furor also. Many people on the ground, they opposed that, but that shutting down the industries, you are killing the livelihoods. What is this? But thankfully, the Taj recovered from that. We had to replace almost many of the marbles in the various different minarets, but then it has recovered substantially now. So if you take a look at the Taj maybe 20 years back, and if you take a look at Taj today, it is a very different picture. It is a different matter altogether that the region of Agra, even today, experiences so significant amount of pollution and smog that you have periodic maintenance which are needed to be carried out. Now, after this, we come to the aspect of this acid rain in detail. It is defined as rain, fog, sleet, or snow that is acidic by pollutants in the air. Mostly they emit nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides. Now, acidity, basically, when the pH value of any compound is less than 7, we refer to it as acidity. So here, rainwater is slightly acidic with a pH range of 5.3 to 6. Now, when these gases, they react with water molecules and oxygen in the atmosphere, mildly acidic sulfuric and nitric acid are formed. So you have two types of them: wet deposit. When they combine, when these particular acid particles or droplets, they combine with the raindrops, that is when we call it as wet deposition. Right. So here, when you have sulfuric and nitric acid particles combining with raindrops and falling on ground surface. Okay, that is a wet deposition. Dry deposition is when you have acid particles formed or carried by the wind and then getting deposited on the surfaces. Okay, that is how acid rain gets created, or that is what we know as acid rain. So here is a kind of a schematic image. So here, if you observe this carefully, so initially you have nitric oxide, which is released, nitrous oxide, nitrogen dioxide, which is released from the vehicles, industries. Sulfur dioxide is also released. Now they interact with the water vapor oxygen to form H2SO4, sulfuric acid, and nitric acid. Now, this sulfuric acid and nitric acid, they sometimes are carried over by the wind, right? And thereby, you have windborne ammonia gas and some soil particles partially, they neutralize the acid. But sometimes, these acidic particles, they interact with the dust particles and the molecules present in the air. They form small particulate matter, and they are carried by the wind, and they are deposited on the surface. They can also be deposited on the ground surface. Sometimes they interact with the clouds, they interact with the raindrops, and the regions, they receive that acid rain. So this is your acid rain. Acid rain. Now the impact of acid rain is quite significant. Impact of acid rain can be felt across. For example, the soil. When the soil turns acidic, it has got the ability to support only certain kinds of plants. Not many plants can be supported by acidic soil. And when the soil turns acidic, many of the microbes which are living in the soil, which is very essential for the fertility of the soil, those microbes, they also start to die. Right? So soil turning acidic is a major issue. So when we have this soil turns acid, it turns acidic. It can support only a few type of plants. Okay, many microbes in the soil die. As a consequence, making the soil infertile. Infertile. Then the forest also, you have the when you have acid rain, immediately many of the plants, they begin to die off. Many of the plants, they suffer from this, right? And in the forest, the overall productivity gets impacted, so the biodiversity gets impacted. Now, acid rain exposure for us humans, that is also dangerous. Skin cancer can be caused, skin infections can be created, right? And many of the times, these dry deposits also, when they get deposited somewhere, or when they are carried by the wind, if by mistake it is inhaled, it can cause various respiratory illnesses along with that. So, it has got various different impacts on monuments, the rocks on which, or the, for example, the statues, the buildings, etc., on which they will get deposited. It leads to slow and steady corrosion. Corrosion is caused, right? So it creates corrosion, leads to of buildings, monuments, and eventual weathering and breakage. In the aftermath of, in fact, when you had the entire crisis in the eastern region of Europe during the late 80s and the early 90s, right? There also, during the warfare, so much amount of pollution was caused, and the industries also were, many of the fossil fuel industries, fossil fuel based industries were situated in the region of Eastern Europe, that Eastern Europe suffered significantly from acid rain in the early 90s, very significantly, right? Now, over a period of time, as they have went over to a kind of an economic a kind of a well-performing condition or a kind of a sustainable condition, now that much amount of pollution is not caused. So now you don't have that much amount of impact or acid rain events which are felt. But not long time back, the entirety of the region of Europe, the entirety of the region of North America, they would not entirety of North America, but certain pockets around the US Canada border on the eastern side, around the region of the Great Lakes, and also in the region of Western Europe in particular, these acid rain phenomena would be quite prominent. In India, acid rain and the dry deposits have been very common because in India we don't have that much amount of rainfall. India will receive less amount of rainfall throughout the year. In Kerala, however, there have been instances of multiple reported instances of the acid rain, wet deposit of that acid rain. In northern part of the country, the Indo-Gangetic plains generally, because you have so much amount of dust particles emanated into the sky, so you have these acidic particles which get deposited as a form of dry deposit. Okay, so that is about acid rain. Now we come to the famed topic and the most innocent topic of it all, pollution in northern India. We do know that India suffers substantially from the issue or from the problem of pollution. But that problem appears to be much more exaggerated in the northern part as compared to the southern part of the country. The southern part of the country is much more, in terms of the air, it is much more cleaner, right? Is it because the people in the southern part of the country are much more environmental friendly? No. It has got nothing to do with the attributes and the feelings and the behavior of the people. It basically, without season when rain fall down, that is called acidic rain. Where did you get that conclusion from? I mean, I did not say that. So no, that is not acid rain. Acid rain is when you have acid particles, sulfuric acid, nitric acid, they interact with the water vapor and or the water droplets and then they fall. It is not about without season when, okay, that is one of the most innovative um, answers to acid rain that I have thought about or that I have come across. But nonetheless, acid rain is when you have those acidic particles which are there in the atmosphere. When they interact with the dust particles, they can get deposited by the wind in certain areas. That is what we refer to as dry deposit of the acid rain. Sometimes the acidic particles, which are now acidic particles, are created. Why? Because of the pollution. So that acidic particles, when they interact with the raindrops and they fall along with the raindrops, that is your acid rain. It has got nothing to do with this, whether it is a season of rain or it has got no season of rain. Breaking of roots can be a result of acid rain. Yes, absolutely yes. Is it coal or peat formed in due course of time as a layer upon one another? What is peat, my dear friend? When we say peat, what is peat? Peat is a form of or is a type of coal. I hope we are aware and I hope you have attended the geography sessions carefully, because if you have attended the geography sessions and then you have this doubt, that reflects very poorly on me. So basically, in the portion of minerals, we have talked about the fact that based upon the carbon content, coal has got four subclassifications: anthracite, bituminous, lignite. Just that it's still in a woody stage, right? If carbonification would have been carried out for another 100 million years, that peat can get converted into bituminous or can even get converted into anthracite if the conditions are conducive enough. So peat is a form of coal. Okay, yes, it is a very innocent question, I agree. Do climate change have the potential to impact the frequency and intensity of acid rain? See, if we are able to control the amount of pollution, we should be able to control the acid rain phenomena. It should not happen. And then Rishandonor, there is rain, red in color, some rain. Where, my dear friend? Where do you find red rain and dark rain? At least in my lifetime, I have only experienced raindrops which are transparent in color. No, that I won't agree that in Kerala you have dark rain. Are you talking about dark rain or are you talking about the dark clouds? Both are very different. Okay, please understand, both of them are very, very different. Blood rain is very different. He is not talking about blood rain. Blood rain is caused by Sirocco in the region of southern Italy and Spain. He's talking about the normal rainfall appearing red. But understand, if the raindrops have that yellowish tinge sometimes, and coming back to the question, if the rainfall has got that yellowish tinge sometimes, it is going to be acidic rain. And water, if it is black, that means it would have combined with the pollutants in that area. But again, I would give you my mail ID, and I will give you my personal mail ID also. And I would request you, I would urge you, whenever you come across those black rain droplets, please send me an image as soon as possible. Okay, whenever you come across that red rain droplets, I hope you are in this country itself. So please send me over the image, and that will immediately will call the guys from the Discovery Channel, and we will make a good documentary out of it. And then red rain is blood rain. That is different. Yeah. Dry spell of acid. So when you talk about dry deposits, that is when you have these acidic particles, they interact with the dust particles, etc., and they form a kind of a particulate matter of sorts, which are acidic in nature. So when the wind moves, they will get deposited in various places. That is a dry deposit of acid rain. Anurag, I am following PPT and running notes only. People around are reading thick books on the topic, including NCRT, Shankar IS, etc. All this is making me feel nervous and left out. Don't feel left out, my dear friend. Read any book that you want. I always tell you, read any book that you want, but only after completion of this PPT, completion of the module. After that, if you feel that the content is inadequate, you are open to read any particular book. But I would say, I would rather suggest that restrict yourself to the PPT, the annotations of it. If required, maybe NCRT chapter 13 to 16, class 12th biology, you can go through. But that will also be largely restricted to the portions we will cover those portions in the class modules itself. But still, if you are feeling left out, I don't want you to feel left out. Read any book which is out there in the market, current affairs, and the portion of the PPT. If you study, more than sufficient. But then you are open to explore any book in the market. I'm not one of those guys who will tell you that only this book is good, rest all the books are bad. Any book that you are willing to explore that. Just keep one thing in mind: you should have the ability to revise that particular book or that material 10 times, 5 to 10 times at least, right? So if you have that ability, open up any book which is there. Now, after this, we come to the portion of pollution in northern India. So we'll take this after the break. Okay, we'll take this up after the break. Baldev, it's necessary to read the NCRTs even after revising PPTs? No. PPTs along with the additional reading materials and just keep a track of the current affairs. More than sufficient, my dear friend. How methane is released from agricultural activities? Methane basically is released when you have, let's suppose, organic compounds which are produced. Now, those organic compounds, they combine with the hydrogen molecules and then they produce methane in the process. So even if you cut a tree, then carbon dioxide and methane is released. In our own digestive system, in our own digestive tract, you have methane which is produced. Biogas that is used, that is methane. When you carry out decomposition of any material, that is methane. When you carry out paddy cultivation, when you plant the paddy crops, you flood that land, and then you let it evaporate, then the water evaporates, methane is produced. Okay. right? So all these lead to production of methane. What is dark rain? That is puzzling me even today. So there is nothing such as dark rain. Understand, sometimes in certain rare cases this has happened, where you have certain black carbon particles which are present in the atmosphere, lot of dust particles which are present in the atmosphere. So the raindrops which have combined with them, they have formed that kind of a muddy murky mixture of sorts. Raindrop is not always so very clean, so it has formed that kind of a muddy and a murky mixture of that. Light or a dark brownish kind of a thing has been created, but that is because, so that is when you have rainfall happening after a long time, when everything is polluted. But the second and the third rains which will happen, it will be cleaner. Okay, so that is the case, right? Now, dark clouds are multiple different kind of clouds. And then, does methane play greater role in global warming compared to other greenhouse gases? Yes, we'll take a look into that when we come to the portion of climate change. So let's take a break, and we'll be back in 15 minutes, and we will continue with why is it that the northern portion of India is significantly more polluted, what is stubble burning, why stubble burning does happen, what are the remedies of that. Okay, let's be back in 15 minutes, and we will continue. As is experienced in the northern India, is much higher as compared to any other parts of the country. Now, that excess amount of pollution is not always attributed or attributable to any one particular reason. There are multiple different geographical reasons, agricultural reasons, climatic reasons, which are in place. Why is it that the northern Indian portion or the northern Indian region is much more polluted? Now, first things first, the basic of it is that we all know that in the northern, particularly in the Gangetic plains, in the plain area, the Indo-Gangetic plain region, spreading all the way from the region of the area of Punjab, Haryana in the west, nowadays even northern part of Rajasthan, spreading across Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, and even Assam. Now that is an area where we know that the amount of population is very high. So when you have a very high population density, very high population density, that creates its own sort of issues, that creates its own sort of problems also, because very high population density means more people will be living in the same region or in a smaller area also. So when you have more number of people living in an area, residing in a region, then obviously you will have issues such as, let's suppose, transportation will become an issue. You will have cluster, the urbanization is of a poorer standard in our country, where you have clustered urban areas where transportation becomes very, very difficult, right? You have the narrow by lanes and the narrow streets, in which oftentimes you frequently experience jams, traffic bottlenecks are created. All of them become the source of pollution. Also, if you have more number of people in an area, that will also give rise to many of the small scale and medium scale industries also. Now these also become a source of pollution. More number of vehicles will be there on the road. More number of vehicles means greater amount of pollution. To add on to that, many portions of northern India, they remain substantially drier. For example, if you consider the central portion and the western portion of the country, and northwestern portion of the country also, for example, consider the region of Punjab, Haryana, northern portion of Rajasthan, Delhi. For majority of the parts of the year, these areas are dry. They will receive rains in very few number of days through the year associated to it. But if that soil becomes very dry, it actually ends up becoming a kind of a sandy particle. So that is where the soil becomes sandy, and that is then uplifted by the winds, creating a kind of a particulate matter suspended in the air also. Now, so let us take a look at the causes. First of all is the vehicles. the vehicle density, the number of vehicles, etc., is much higher in the northern part of the country. So they are a significant source of pollution. And in the vehicles, it is not the case that you have the newer vehicles which are a source of pollution. It is particularly the older vehicles which still move on the, or which still function on the older tech, right? On the defunct tech. So those are the kind of vehicles which significantly get impacted by this, right? Or which rather get impact the environment. So that is why when we talk about these vehicles, vehicular movement, etc., they end up creating a lot of these contaminants. They release a lot of these contaminants and pollutants into the atmosphere. Industries, as I told you, many of the industries are in a very dilapidated condition, older condition. And here you can also include the aspect of brick kilns where you manufacture the bricks. So there also the amount of pollution caused by these is also quite substantial. Power plants and refineries. Majority of the refineries are situated in the northern part of the country, so volatile organic compounds are released in large amounts from these refineries. And power plants also, because most of the power plants in our country, they are thermal based power plant. And the thermal based power plants, most of them, they operate on coal, right? So the thermal power plants, they basically run on coal. So that is why burning of coal happens. So this releases compounds such as fly ash. So various gases are released, gases and compounds like mercury, silicates, fly ash, everything is substantially released. Now, there also the technology has evolved. The newer power plants that you see, newer power plants won't have that much amount of smoke emitted because the technology has come a long way where now you have the provision to deploy what are referred to as electrostatic precipitators or ESPs, right? You have electrostatic precipitators. Precipitators. Now, what are these electrostatic precipitators? So, in this, you will observe that these are large installations, oftentimes the size of 2 to 3 storied buildings. So, these are very large installations in your power plant. So, these are very, very large. And in these electrostatic precipitators, you will rather find the electrodes, very large metallic electrodes, which are suspended. Okay. You have large number of these electrodes which are suspended. Now the mechanism of this is very simple. It works on the basis of electrolysis. How you carry out electrolysis? You provide charge, and in the electrolyte in between, you have the distinction and the removal of the particles. Here also, as these are suspended, what you provide is a limited charge in one of these, and you keep the other plate as neutral. These are very large electrode plates that are suspended. So in one of them, you keep them neutral and you provide a charge in other one. So one of the plates is given zero charge, or rather is given some charge, while the other is kept at neutral. And this charge which is provided is very temporary in nature. It is not as if it is permanently charged. Now, in this case, what is done? That the flue gases, what is also flue gas is the name, flue gas is the name which is given to the pollutant gas which is emitted or which emanates from the various industrial outsource, etc., or the chimneys, the waste gas which is generated, that is known as flue gas. So here the flue gas enters. Flue gas enters. And here you have the output to chimney. Right. So here what happens, as these flue gases enter, along with that many of the particles also enter. Temporarily, a charge is provided in one of the plate and the other plate is kept neutral. So as a result of that, there's a potential difference which is there. There's a kind of a potential difference. Now, due to that potential difference, the particles, they tend to gain or lose a charge. So the particles, what they do, let's suppose you have these particles in the gas. Right. So these particles, they also end up getting charged in the process. So many of these particles, they gain or lose that charge. And when they basically, let's suppose they gain a positive or a negative charge, now they start sticking to these plates. These particles, they start sticking to the plates depending upon the charge that they develop. Now, after some time, all the major particles which are there, they get influenced by the electric charge and they stick to the side of the plates. Right. Now, once that happens, that means the air has been filtered out of the major particles. The particles which are there, the air has been filtered out of it. Now, after that, what is done, that the entire charge is withdrawn from the entire system. No plate has got any charge now. So as soon as that you withdraw the charge, all these particles which are sticking to the plate, they suddenly, they start dropping and they start accumulating here. All the various different particles, they simply rub off the plate when you withdraw the charge and they start getting deposited here. Right? And then the gases which come out are much more cleaner. So these electrostatic precipitators are used nowadays in order to purify these flue gases so that you don't have large particulate matter which are emitted. Now, in these power plants, nowadays, you don't have that much amount of particulate matter, but earlier you had a lot of, and in fact, even today, few of the power plants, they actually release a lot of fly ash. What is fly ash? So when you burn coal, you basically get a kind of a small ash-like substance, which has got various different compounds such as aluminum silicates and so on. Now, thereby, these particular small whitish substances, they get deposited over a wider area, larger area. They can contaminate the soil, they contaminate the water, and obviously the air also. Right? So they, in early cases, almost all the regions where the power plants would be there, they would suffer from fly ash pollution. But then the government, since that point of time, has made various different norms where you have, now it has become compulsory for the regions around the power plant to use that fly ash for construction of, let's say, pavements, because that fly ash, it consists of elements such as calcium, it consists of elements such as aluminium silicates, etc. So they are used to manufacture bricks. You would have seen a kind of a grayish whitish brick structure, right? Not every brick is the reddish structure. You would have seen some whitish grayish bricks also. So they are made from fly ash. Now those bricks, they are lighter also. They have a strength property also. So in those regions around the power plants, it has been all made mandatory to carry out the construction of pavements, etc., with fly ash. So that is very beneficial even for the ecosystem, for absorption of water, etc. So fly ash is increasingly being used for building purposes so as to ward off the problem of pollution which is caused by the emanation of fly ash in that area. Okay. So that is basically the case of the power plants and how we can get rid of the pollution, largely the particulate matter emanated from these power plants. Then you have construction activities also. Wherever you have greater amount of population, greater amount of construction activity will also be carried out. And in that greater amount of construction activity, you will basically find that a lot of these dust particles are continuously emanated. Then you have the problem, which is known as stubble burning. Now, what is stubble? And what do we understand by this stubble burning? How much large this plate is in it is. So these plates that you see in the electrostatic precipitators, they will be easily the entire electrostatic precipitator is of many meters altogether, right? It can be almost 20-25 meters in terms of its length. In terms of its width, it is 10 to 15 meters. So it is close to around a two-story building that you can think about. A two-story building, how big it is, that is electrostatic precipitator. The plates also the size of your room, multiply it by 3 to 4 times, so that is the size of the plates in this case. Okay, so that is the case of electrostatic precipitator, right? And in this slide, the below image, does it have or not? No. This is the case where no electrostatic precipitator is there. Okay. So in the case of electrostatic precipitator, it is with the help of this periodic charge that you provide that accumulates the waste. Now, when we say stubble and the burning of stubble, first of all, let us understand what the problem is. What is stubble? So when you harvest the paddy crop, you have few of the outcrops which get left behind, right? Few of the outcrops, they get left behind. Now, those outcrops which get left behind, they are known as stubble, right? So the outcrops which get left behind, that is known as stubble, right? So here, these are very hard and these are pointy also. That is why immediately after harvesting, you would not be able to walk through these rice or paddy fields unless and until you have had a good slippers or good shoes, because it is so very sticky and pointy, it can puncture the skin very easily. So that is how hard it is. So stubble is the residue left after the harvest of the paddy crop. Residue left after the harvest of paddy crop. Right. Now, why is it that people have to burn this stubble? This is something that you don't find in the southern part of India. Southern part of India also you grow paddy, but you find this phenomena to be prevalent only in northern part of the country. Every year this happens. Every year in the month of October, November, suddenly everybody goes into a kind of an overdrive, as if somebody has basically wound them up, be it the courts, be it the political parties, be it the citizenry. Everybody starts creating such amount of noise that, this today also the air is very polluted. Yesterday also the air was very polluted, as if the expectation is that yesterday the air was polluted, today the air will be very clean. Look at all the newspaper headlines. And that is what gives you an idea about how short-sighted and how short-term people's memory is, right? The entire month of November and the entire month of October, you would have heard about no other news story other than Delhi pollution due to stubble burning. Delhi pollution, stubble burning. Delhi pollution, disastrous. Wait for another 15 days. 15 days. This will be forgotten. Nobody is going to talk about pollution again for one full year. Again, till the month of October. Again, everybody will suddenly start going into overdrive that this is the problem. Today also this problem. So from tomorrow, such vehicles won't be allowed in Delhi. From tomorrow, construction won't be allowed in Delhi. But still the air is polluted. That tells you the less or the least amount of information that people convey to the general public. Standing today here, I can give you a guarantee. Last year also, and those of you who have attended the previous batches, you would know this. I have told you earlier also that this will happen. This news story will come. And Many of you are going to give the mains exam next year also. Many of you are going to follow current affairs for 2025 also. Just keep a track on current affairs. Next year, again, I guarantee you, in the month of October, November, the country will be having the same discussion. And the trend and the pattern will be the same. The judges will scold the executive basically will point fingers at each other, that okay, that state government is not coordinating, that state government is not coordinating, that is why this is a problem which is happening. There will be some panic moves such as odd even, etc., which hardly will make any difference. Basically everybody, and talk to the bureaucrats also, right? I'm sure you would have some of your seniors, etc., who are in the bureaucratic position in these states. Talk to them. They will all tell you that all the politicians are aware that this entire debate will go off within 1 month. So they all make noise for that 1 month, then they will stay silent. The public forgets it very soon, and then again, we're back to normal. So every year, why does this stubble burning happen? And that too only in the northern part of the country. Why is it so? So that is because here, paddy is kharif crop. Always the government blames the farmer. I think it is never the case. None of the governments can afford to blame the farmers. It will be a kind of a political suicide, right? So they say that stubble burning is responsible, but they will point a finger at the state government or the local government. They will never point a finger at the farmers. It is a kind of a political suicide. Nobody will do that. So this is paddy is a kharif crop. Now kharif crop, when it is sown, particularly paddy in the region of Punjab, Haryana and Western UP, in the month of July, August, harvested in October end. Now, wheat is sown in these areas. Now, wheat, which is a rabi crop, is sown in November. Right? So as you can see, from the point of harvest to the point of preparing your field for the rabi crop, the time window is very, very less. So as the time window is very, very less, after they have harvested, the farmers have that stubble which is left on the farmland. Now, what do they do with that? They have to prepare the field. Now that stubble is so very stiff, it doesn't even allow you to till the land, right? Easily, it doesn't allow you to do that. Now, the farmers have around 1 week or 10 days, 20 days time in front of them. Now, the expectation of the general unaware public is that they should have picked it out. What is the issue? Why are they burning it? They should have picked it out. We throw our garbage in that plastic sheet every day in the morning. The farmers could also have done that. It is simply not possible to pluck it one by hand. You need to deploy a large amount of manual labor. And many farmers, in fact, in Punjab and Haryana and Western UP, who are well off, the rich farmers, and that region has got a lot of rich farmers, they do that. They deploy the manual labors in that case. But what about the small farmers? Manual labor is costly. It is a costly proposition. For a land which is of a few acres, they will be spending a fortune which they cannot afford. So what do? How do they prepare the land? The easiest method that they find, they burn the stubble. And when they burn the stubble, that is when basically all that emission happens. Sulfur, nitrogen oxides, then you have basically methane, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, black carbon. These react with each other to form ground level ozone is also produced. And this happens. Now, why doesn't it happen in southern part of the country? Are the farmers in southern part of the country more eco-friendly? No. The reason is, in the southern part of the country, the farmers are not in a rush to prepare the land for wheat. Wheat is a winter crop. You cannot plant wheat in the mid or the end of December. You need to plant wheat around the mid of November so that you can utilize the early rains caused by the western disturbance. You can utilize those rains. Now, that is why in southern part of the country, or for that matter, even in the eastern part of the country. For example, eastern portion of Bihar, the eastern portion or the region of West Bengal, the plains of Assam, there also you have continuous crops of rice which are grown. So you are not in a hurry to uproot the stubble. You allow the stubble to remain there for some time, automatically it will start degrading, decomposing, it will become softer. And then basically you can till the land. But then, what about the region in the northwest, the so-called grain bowl of the country? Punjab, Haryana, Western UP. You don't have time, so you burn it off. Now, ideally, the government has passed various legislations. Earlier, I don't know if you recall the case, but just to give you a brief background about it, this is an issue which has been continuing in the same pattern for almost the past 10 years or more. It is actually when the awareness significantly increased, that is when people started noticing this. Earlier, people would simply take this as a kind of a pollution. But it was during 2015, 16, 17 when this situation simply exploded beyond proportion. Now, when this stubble burning happens, the state government has basically made certain laws, legislations, where basically if you burn the stubble, you will be fined. You can also be penalized in the form of jail, right? You can be imprisoned. Now the farmers they have found a hack. What they do is they are now well aware that, and think about it, if that detailed information has reached the farmers, obviously someone at the bureaucratic level or at the level of a very high position in the government, that they are informing them. The farmers are now aware, and in fact, the print has given a very beautiful article about this, where they have talked about the fact that now the farmers are aware that the mapping and the tracking that where which farmland is carrying out stubble burning is done with the help of satellites. Satellite imagery is done. So this year, they are also aware of the fact that in the period between 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., that region gets a blind spot. Satellites, they are unable to track that region in between 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. And again, after 9:30 p.m., the satellites come back up in that area. So this year, what had been observed, if you had followed the news story, that NASA reported suddenly 1300% rise in the stubble farm fires within one day. People are aware about that. That 8 to 9, do one thing, nobody is tracking us, it is night time, burn the stubble. They are doing that because they don't have an alternative, do they? Now the government has come up with various mechanisms that, we will utilize this stubble to get biofuel. We will utilize this stubble to do this, to make fibers, to make packaging materials. Fair enough. But who will extract that stubble? That is the problematic part. That extraction of stubble is the problematic part. That is the costly portion. That is why they burn it. But why is it that it is happening nowadays in the past 10, 12 years? Why not earlier? This would have been the case always. So basically, the Punjab state government and the region of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, I hope you are aware that the monsoon reaches last at that portion and withdraws first from that area. So these regions receive very little amount of rainfall. And when you grow crops such as paddy, which require around 120 centimeter of rainfall every year, Punjab and Haryana, they receive around 50 to 70 centimeter of rainfall every year, depending upon the year and the conditions. How do you make up for the rest? So you extract groundwater. So groundwater depletion in these areas has been happening at an alarmingly exorbitant rate. The region of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP have been drained out of groundwater. Almost every farmland has deployed tube wells and they are flooding the farmland with water, right? As if will be no consequence. There is a consequence. Not only is the availability of drinking water supply becoming difficult, but now the groundwater, which is at a depleted level, now that groundwater is bringing contaminants such as cadmium, zinc, and in case of Punjab, even elements of uranium. So now it is becoming problematic. So the Punjab state government basically had passed a legislation in the state assembly about the conservation of groundwater, where they said that you carry out rice cultivation, but you will plant that rice only after the monsoon rains, not before that. So what does that mean? That the farmers, in order to plant that rice, they wait till end July and they plant it in August. So that is why it is harvested in end October, right? So that is why you have that conundrum where always it will be harvested in the month of October. And always the farmland has to be prepared before the next planting season. What do? You'll burn the stubble. This will happen next year also. This will happen year after that also. So that act in itself is so very flawed. Is Punjab able to conserve groundwater as a result of this legislation? Absolutely not. Punjab is still exploiting, Haryana and Western UP, they are still exploiting groundwater at an unparalleled scale, not observed anywhere else in the country, other than few of the South Indian cities which are there in the plateau areas. So they are still extracting groundwater at an exorbitant rate. Just that, now it has become almost illegal to sow the paddy crops earlier. If you could have planted them earlier, you could have harvested them earlier. If you could have harvested them earlier, within a couple of weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, automatically the stubble would have begun to decompose. It would have become softer and it could be extracted. That is why you don't find this issue of stubble burning to be that prominent during the late 80s, during the 90s. There also, rice and wheat was continuously being grown in Punjab, right? But still you did not have this particular issue. But now it is becoming a pertinent issue. Why? Because now you have restricted the time window. And due to that restriction of time window, you will always face that paucity of time. Now, what is the solution? What is the way out in this? Solution, long-term solution, is basically the crop diversification. The region of Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, they are not at all naturally suited to grow rice, sugarcane, etc. That is not the region to grow those particular crops. It is destroying the soil in that area. It is depleting the groundwater in that area. And they are growing it in that region. So you need crop diversification to happen. This crop diversification, you grow different type of crop. Rather than wheat, grow any other kind of a crop. But why do they stick to rice and wheat, rice and wheat, rice and wheat? It is destroying the ecosystem. But they grow it because you have a kind of a minimum support price which is given there. And mind you, not in every state the farmers get the amount of minimum support price. But in these regions, it is a politically sensitive issue. So that is why from the middlemen to the farmers, everybody is concerned only about wheat and rice. Think about it. Tomorrow, let's suppose I find out that a crop like apple is remunerative economically. I go to a region like Ladakh and I start farming apple. I modify the ecosystem there to grow apple. I might gain economically for maybe 5 years, 10 years. But what after that? The region doesn't suit it naturally. You have a method of natural balance. Ecosystem always tries to strike a balance. The soil will turn infertile. It will become so very costly that the future generations will suffer there. That is exactly what is happening there. And this was predicted a long time back. In the 80s and the mid 80s and the early 90s, people had basically pointed this out. That if you get stuck in that rice wheat cycle, not only is the soil turning out to be infertile, you will be exploiting all the groundwater reserves. Eventually, if the soil turns infertile, the productivity will reduce. As the productivity will reduce, the farm income will reduce. When the farm income reduces, there will be greater amount of social discontent, social unease, and there will be greater amount of conflicts which will happen. And as a consequence of that, what we are witnessing in Punjab is something which is very disastrous, where you have mass level of anybody who has got smallest amount of money with them. Go to the regions such as Jalandhar, Kapurthala, Jandiala, Amritsar. Almost everybody, if they have some money, they will have someone abroad. Why? Because they feel that the economic remuneration is not enough in that region. Right? So that is why, if farming has to be made remunerative in that area again, there is no other alternative than to go for sustainable agriculture and a climate smart agriculture. What is sustainable agriculture? You grow the crop in that area which that region is suited for. Don't grow a crop which that region is not suited for just because you are getting MSP. MSP anyways is not sustainable economically. Those of you who would have studied economics would realize that it is not sustainable in the long run. Somebody will have to take hard call, maybe 10 years down the line, maybe 15 years down the line, maybe 20 years down the line. Right? It is not very sustainable an event. But then growing rice and wheat, and that too in a short time window, creates this issue. There have been various different remedies. You have large machines which have come, which pluck this right off the ground. You basically have the concept of pusa decomposer tablets, where you basically mix those tablets in water, you spray them, and as a result of that, that increases the rate of decomposition of the stubble, leads to softening of the stubble. Then you can prepare the farmland. But again, if you deploy machines, only the rich farmers can do that. Very rich farmers can do that. The poor farmers can never be able to deploy the machines, right? Then when it comes to the aspect of, let's suppose, why isn't it the case that large farm organizations where multiple farmers they come together, why don't they together buy these machines and deploy them in all farmlands? Now think about it. You are a farmer who is barely able to make ends meet. Now, if you have a small surplus, will you care for the environment, that let me clean up the air and let me then buy this machine and do that? No. You will never spend money on that. You will burn it off. That, okay, 5 days, 10 days, or 1 month, I won't go out in the open because it is very polluted. But after that, at least I will have some money. You can't blame the farmers for that, can you? It is a government policy. That is why crop diversification is a must. Crop diversification is required. Without crop diversification, you cannot possibly put an end to these farm fires, regardless of how many economic incentives that you provide. That, okay, if you bring all the stubble to me, I will make paper packaging out of it, I'll give you some money. But who will take care of that extraction cost, of that transportation cost? It is not. Selling that stubble is not that remunerative, right? So that is why changing the crop cycles, putting an end to that groundwater extraction law, and then also nudging the people to go for sustainable agricultural activity is the only solution. And the problem is that in that area, if you try to propagate the fact that, and it is not something which should be considered as a sentimental issue, because that is a reality on the ground. Anybody belonging from that area would attest to it. Anybody who has lived in that area for some time would attest to it. As an individual, I can vouch for it. I have lived in that area for a very long period of time. So basically, whenever you bring up that issue with the farmers, that why don't you plant other crop, they basically will immediately shun you out. It is a politically sensitive matter, where how dare you tell the farmers what to grow? It is a kind of a political sensitive issue. You would have seen the kind of response which was generated during the kind of farm agitations, right? Not many people were even aware about why those agitations are taking place. They simply attested to the fact that the farmers are saying something, it must be correct. The farmers have been told by the previous generations of them also that the soil has reached saturation level. Now you need to get rid of these crops, grow something else. UPSC, if you take a look at the questions, the previous year questions of UPSC has been asking these questions for the past 10 years or more, either in the optional or in the general studies. What are the issues or the problems of the rice wheat cycle continuously growing? How do we come out of that rice wheat cycle? So the government at large has been aware for a long period of time that this is disastrous, but it is the aspect that we don't have the ability to act. Right? I hope that is understood. In that scene, can we penalize the farmers for stubble burning? That is what I told you. They are burning the farmlands at night between 8 to 9:30. And then let's suppose if the police comes to catch you, many farmers are penalized, by the way. Few of them are penalized. When the police comes to catch you up, what do you say? That the nearby farmland was put on fire. That fire spread to my farmland also. You can easily have that excuse. So that is why culpability also, or catching the people, is not always the solution. If, let's suppose, I make a norm that in this road only this kind of vehicle will ply, only this kind of vehicle will move, for everyone else you walk on the road, some people will violate that. Will you start fining every one of them? That is never the long-term solution, is it? Okay. And chemicals are sprayed leading to decomposition. Yes, the PUSA decomposer tablets that are there, they are mixed with water and they are basically sprayed over. That initiates or further accelerates the microbial action, but that also takes time. It is not as if today you spray and tomorrow it will be softened. That decomposition process will also take some time. Okay. Right? And why don't private companies invent new type of machinery to remove the stubble which can be used to make different products? But if you invent, let's suppose you are that private company, let's suppose you have invented a machine, will you deploy the machine free of cost? Obviously not. You will charge money for it. Why? You need to pay the employees. You need to generate some profit in order to survive. So you will charge money for that machine. The small farmers will never be able to give you money for that. You have machines in the market which have the power to extract that stubble, but it is very costly. It cannot be deployed. Why can't we use this stubble in manufacturing of? You can use that stubble for multiple processes: biofuel, paper packaging, fabric manufacturing, sometimes even insulator materials. Sometimes it can be used as the organic decomposing materials. You have multiple utilities. It is not as if people are not aware about the utilities of that stubble. But then you need to extract that stubble within a short time window. That process is costly. That is why people don't do that. Okay. I hope that is understood. Instead of money, take the raw materials for free. No industry will be able to operate. What if tomorrow people won't give you the raw materials? What if people will charge money for that raw materials? That you deploy the machine, you are a private company, you would have a lot of money, deploy the machine, but I am a poor farmer, give me money for that raw material. So it is a no-go, right? Generally, what is the perception that people have with private companies? That you would be sitting on loads of cash, help the poor people, give it out on free. But when you actually operate a company, that is when you realize that you cannot do that. And but sir, vegetation diversification will not create decrease in grain yield for such a huge population where hunger is. So that is a major misconception, Divya, and good that you have raised the question. So the question that she has raised is that, is it the case, or can't it be the case, or would it be the case where if we stop growing rice in that area, then we will face the problem of hunger? Please understand, at this stage of time in the country, yes, we have a lot of poverty, yes, we have malnutrition, but undernourishment is a major problem. The malnutrition that you observe is not because of lack of rice and wheat. Rice and wheat don't have that much nutrient. Better to provide the kids millets, better to provide the kids vegetables. Why is it the case that fruits are out of the reach of the poor people? Poor people can never buy fruits because the fruits are so costly. They continue to buy rice and wheat. Rice and wheat is not the solution to hunger. We have enough buffer stock for rice and wheat. Think about it. The government is distributing free rations to around 80 crore people since the time of the COVID, and the recent announcement has been that that program will continue for another 5 years. So clearly, we are not going to be falling so short of grain. Grow these grains. But who told you that these grains could be grown only in Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP, where already the productivity is declining, the farm yield is declining, the farm income is declining? There are regions in the country which are well suited climatically to grow this. Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu grows 3 crops of rice in a year. Odisha, West Bengal, Assam, they grow 3 crops of rice in 1 year. Provide them MSP. They will basically grow it all year round. They will provide you with a good yield, right? So because of that politically charged sentiment around it, that is why all that attention around rice and wheat, all that remuneration is basically used there. That is where we need to change the policy. We need to change the policy of public procurement, and there has to be a crop diversification. Very innocent question. Can't farmers hire people for extraction of stubble? Both will earn money. The farmer by selling the stubble, and the person who plucks the stubble will also be paid. But it is the small farmers, basically, they don't have the ability to pay the manual labors, right? Uh, so basically what you are recommending is many of the farmers, they will take a loan to buy the wheat seeds and plant the wheat seeds. So what you are recommending is, while you're doing that, take another loan and deploy manual labor on your field also. They don't do that because they're not sure whether that will be sold in the market or not. And the other aspect is that can government buy it for free? Well, that is something which is absolutely impractical. Where does the money come from? The government should provide subsidy. The government should buy things for free. The government should give cash grants. The government should build infrastructure. The government should not take that much tax. The government should provide the best healthcare facilities. The government should clean the air. The government should provide irrigation also. The government should provide MSP incentives also. Where does the money come from? India is not an oil-rich country. We don't have oil which is present here that we can sell it off and the government is earning money. The government still continues in a kind of a current account deficit. I hope we are aware of that, right? Our spend is more as compared to our remuneration. We expect that, for example, what is the general expectation of the public? Goods should be very cheap. Infrastructure should be the highest of the quality, better than what you see in Dubai, right? Government should buy things from us for free, or buy things from us, would provide things for free, but we are not going to pay tax. So the government should know how to manufacture money by some reason or the other. They should be able to do so. You yourself are also preparing to be a part of the government. Maybe tomorrow, day after tomorrow, or few years from now, you might be at the level of secretary position. You should be aware of the fact that we in India, we don't have that much amount of money, right? Government has got no business to stay in business unless and until you are an autocratic nation like China. You cannot function business. So lesser the government intervention, more organic that particular economy is. Government should say farmers, if you want MSP, then I like the kind of solutions that you're. Why millets are not encouraged in Punjab? Millets are basically because, as I told you, there is that inertia of rice wheat cycle, and that inertia is very hard to uproot. If you go to that region, if you and those of you belonging from that area, I cannot explain it enough. So basically, if you talk to the farmers that why don't you grow other crop, the answer that they will give you, that my grandparents have grown this crop, they have done well. My parents have grown this crop, they have done well. We are growing this crop, till now we are doing well. The level of income is reducing, but that is because the government is not doing something. The soil is turning infertile. There also, pick any common man out of the street, ask them 10 problems, ask them 10 problems, they will give you 1,000 problems that the country is facing. Ask them the solutions for all of them. They will say Government should take care, government should take care, government should take care, government should take care, government should take care. That is never the solution. Okay, I hope you are able to look at the larger picture. But in the long run, cotton, pulses, soybean, maize, millets, vegetables, these are the way out. These will fight hunger also. These will be oil seeds for that matter. These will fight hunger also. These will lead to price stabilization in the market also. And these will help in recharge of the soil fertility and retention of the groundwater also. Abhishek, I have heard that there is one liquid which decomposes stubble, then also farmers are burning. See, Abhishek, let me tell you, it is not the case that the farmers are unaware. That is why I told you that snippet or anecdote about the news story, that they are burning it after 8 p.m. If the farmers were that unaware that burning of the stubble, etc., should not be carried out, why would they burn it only after 8 and between 8 to 9 p.m.? That tells you they are aware. But then procuring those liquid from the market, spraying it over, waiting for them to decompose. If it does not decompose, then anyways you have to go for the burning of it. That is where they are not reliant. They are not relying on that. Okay, that is where the problem is. Why don't they use tractor to rotor that stubble? In our southern side, we use the rotor in the stubble. It will mix with the soil. But my dear friend Chandrasekhar, is it the case that in your field, immediately after you harvest, you use that rotor? You wait for a few days, don't you? And in those few days, automatically the stubble gets a bit softer. And there again, I will come with the same argument here. Where do the poor farmers afford a tractor from? Where will they get that tractor from? And mind you, by the way, this stubble burning is not only happening in India. Pakistan also is doing that, right? Because that also follows the rice wheat cycle, the Punjab province of it. So there also you have this stubble burning. Okay, right? Should we write political sentiment issue or what to write for the solution? So the solution to the problem is crop diversification, right? Then you need to amend the act such as the Groundwater Act of Punjab, and you need to provide greater economic incentives. Okay, now we can ask large farmers to change the crop, like saying who have more land. You cannot do that, can you? How will you enforce that? That if you have a large land, don't grow this kind of a crop. If farmers are aware of everything, then why don't they start growing millets? Because the MSP is not provided to the same extent, despite the fact that the government is at loss due to the provision of MSP. The MSP that the government provides, at that rate, the government cannot sell the rice anywhere. Even for export, the government cannot sell that rice. Despite that fact, the government continues with MSP. Every year there is a raise in MSP, and still there are farm protests. As we speak, Punjab has just now resolved another farm agitation because they want more MSP, right? So that will, if you increase the MSP for a certain crop, it will be a short term. It is like a kind of a drug. You provide that, people will be happy. After that, they will need more. And that is the case because the input cost is rising up. There is no denying the fact that the farm input cost is rising up. They need to meet that up. Okay. I hope you have gotten the larger picture. I have still many questions out there. Why can't the farmers use some agricultural tools to take out the stubble? Okay, from this, I will give you an example of what is done in regions such as Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. There also paddy crop is grown. So what the farmers there, they end up doing is they carry out animal husbandry, right? Mixed farming, where you take care of the animals also, rearing of the animals also, and growing of the crops also. So there, what they do, many of them, they rear ducks in large proportion. Now, after harvesting that paddy, they leave those ducks to roam around in the farmland in the number of hundreds. Now, these ducks, they have the webbed padded feet. So they will stomp on those, right? Inadvertently, slowly, steadily, they will basically stomp on those. They will flatten those up. But why will the ducks move there? The ducks will move there because there, after harvest of a crop, you have small insects, worms, etc. which are there in the ground still. So they consume those. So as a consequence of that, you will have the ducks also getting the much needed protein, requirement of protein. So the animals will have a better produce of eggs, meat, etc. And the farm also is taken care of. The stubble is softened. So that is also a way out. But then again, that has got a limited level of awareness amongst the farmers. Okay. What if the government sends some researchers to those areas to propagate about land and about crops they can cultivate and send some economists to indicate to them how much? Do you think they will care? Do you think they will care if you have economists coming from Delhi into those areas and then telling them that, this is the loss that is happening? Nobody cares. No, they all read it in newspapers. Nobody cares, trust me. So here, why this problem is not raised after the wheat harvest? The problem is not raised after the wheat harvest because after you harvest wheat, first of all, the soil is still a bit softer. Secondly, after that, you have around 2 to 3 months of time window before you have to plant rice again. So there is enough time to prepare your field. It is that short time window where the farmers, they don't get that. Okay. Now, after this, we continue and rest of the questions I'll take at the end. Other reason, topography and location. That is also a dominant factor. When we talk about the southern part of the country, the peninsular region of the country, the peninsular region of the country is frequented by rain-bearing clouds. And all that rainfall which happens, I hope we are aware that the natural tendency of rainfall, the amount of rainfall received decreases from south to north and decreases from east to west. Southern part receives very high amount of rainfall. Now, whenever those rains happen, they will carry all the particulate matter, the fumes, the gases, etc. They will fix it to the ground. They will basically dissolve them, put it on the ground. That is why there is much cleaner air. Whereas in the north, that rainfall is very limited, right? For example, you had some amount of rainfall in the month of November. Look at the amount of joy that it brought to the faces of the people there because the pollution was significantly abated. Pollution was taken care of by the rainfall. In the southern part of the country, you have this happening frequently. It is not as if a city like Bangalore pollutes less. No, Bangalore has got a lot of these pollutants which are released regularly. Construction, road transportation. Bangalore pollutes a lot. But the advantage that Bangalore has is its location. Bangalore is situated at a place where you have a gap in the Western Ghats to the west of it. So as a result of that, you have a regular passage which is provided and the wind motion is quite regular. So all the pollutants are carried by the wind and the air is cleaner. It is not as if in Chennai you don't have these problems. You have these problems. In Mumbai, you have these problems. But there, the level of pollution is not felt to that extent because you have the regular interaction of the sea and the land breeze, which disperses these pollutants. In the northern part of the country, why is it that this debate of air pollution is not carried out in the month of April and May? April and May, arguably, they are amongst the driest months, right? And in April and May, you will have more road dust, more construction dust. But that debate you will never hear in April and May. Debate you will always hear, that discussion you will always hear in the month of October, November. Why is it so? Because during these months of November, December, late October, November, December, winter starts to come in. And when winter comes in, that leads to basically temperature inversion. Temperature inversion means cold air near the ground and warmer air above. As a consequence of this, no mixing of air takes place. When you don't have any mixing of air takes place, pollutants stay in the same region for a longer duration. Pollutants stay in a region for long. Yes, they are suspended in the air. That is why it is only in these winter months. Not, yes, the amount of pollution increases due to the stubble burning, due to crackers, firecrackers, etc. But these are only cosmetic. Had these events not happened, trust me, still the air would be very polluted. If that is the reason, if that would have been the reason, then why only the region, or why is it that the pollution level can be felt as far east as the region of Patna? There also the pollution is very significant. So it is during the winter months where the situation gets simply exaggerated, okay, because of the conditions. And you have other factors of topography as well. Now, these are your continental areas, the land regions. These are not closer to any water body. So you have a lack of regular wind movement here. Lack of regular wind motion. Okay, lack of a regular wind movement. And other than the fact you have temperature inversion, now during these months, you have a permanent wind system which blows across the northern part of the country. That is in the region of, to the north of Rajasthan, Delhi, Western UP, Haryana, Punjab. You have a permanent wind system which is in existence. Are we aware of which wind system is in existence in these parts or in these months of the year? Can we take a random guess that which wind system is in existence during this time? Good. Dudecula, you are correct. Shalu, good. Most of you who have written Western disturbances, you're not completely correct, but you're not incorrect as well. Vaishna, Sarita, Shamil, good. It is basically, Aniket, very good. It is the existence and the presence of westerlies. Westerlies are dominant. Here you have the, during the months, during winter months, westerlies are dominant. Now, if I say that westerlies are dominant, means they are moving from west to east. That is why even the farm fires which are caused in Punjab, even they are carried on over to India, right? But it is a different matter altogether, where when you have some people who are saying that only Pakistan is responsible for the portion of pollution in India. It is not the case. Had the farm fires not occurred in Pakistan, still you have enough farm fires in Punjab and Haryana to create this issue. So I hope by this you understand that it is a systemic issue. It is not the case that if you change this person from political power, you bring someone else, this issue will abate. No, it is a systemic issue. For that, you need to change the system on the ground. You need to change the crop pattern on the ground. You need to change the pattern of functioning on the ground. Only then will you yield some amount of results. So this brings fumes, brings pollutants from west to east. Okay, they bring the pollutants from west to east. Okay, so that is the case where the topography basically, in a way, concentrates all the pollutants in the northern part, because this is the region where the winds cannot blow beyond the Himalayas. So it is not as if the pollutants will be carried furthermore. In fact, for the past couple of years, even Mumbai, those of you belonging from Mumbai, would always identify Mumbai with a very clean air. Mumbai basically had a lot of issues earlier also, but air would be always clean. It would be a mess of an urban area. It is a reflection of how not to grow an urban area earlier. But now, what you observe is that Mumbai is also experiencing very high amount of pollution. Why is that? Because construction activities are going on at a massive scale, a scale which Mumbai had never witnessed before. Right? You have the coastal highway system, the network, etc., which is being built, the widespread metro network, which is being built. All of that construction dust, given the winter season and given the inversion condition which is experienced in certain cases, that exacerbates the amount of pollution felt in Mumbai. That is why Mumbai suffers from it. But again, as I told you, 50 years from now, we won't be staring at this issue anymore. In fact, even 15 to 20 years from now, when India would have reached some level of a better developmental status, we would not experience this, or we will not experience it to that level. Take the case of China for that matter. Now, during the Beijing Olympics were held in 2008. During the Beijing Olympics, China's biggest concern was pollution. Now, Beijing Olympics was a platform which was well curated by China in order to showcase its prowess, its development. Here, if we hold any international event or an international sport, everybody is very mindful how much money you are spending there. China spent tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars as per few estimates, in order to change the entire infrastructure around Beijing and various other cities in order to host the Olympics. But as soon as the athletes landed there, immediately the problem or the talking point at that point of time was what? It is almost unfavorable for sporting activities. What did China do? China carried out various methods of cloud seeding, artificial rain in order to take care of the pollution temporarily, but it still continued. The factories around Beijing were shut down. Even today, even nowadays, you have a large scale order where China simply suspends the functioning of the factories. Right? Now those factories have been shifted to a different location. China can do that. We cannot do that. We cannot say that all the factories around Delhi simply pack up your bags, go to the region of Rajasthan, and there you set up the factory. China can do that. So now, if you observe China, now that they have, from 2008 compared to now, they have reached a level of economic prosperity. Now, the level of pollution is much lower. Delhi at that point of time, which was cleaner in comparison, is now the most polluted one. 15 years down the line, trust me in that, the level of pollution in the region of Delhi will also come down, because the construction activities beyond a point, they won't keep on increasing. They stagnate, right? You cannot keep on building more and more infrastructure. You spread out in that case, right? You spread outside the city. So that is when the dust particles, the sources of pollution, that reduce. I hope we are able to see and look at the larger picture here. Okay. Now, when you have a large amount of population, the waste generated is also very high, always. And it is directly proportional. More number of people will generate more amount of waste. Now, all that waste, the solid waste, the municipal waste which is generated, it is dumped in various different places. Now, in many of these areas in the northern part of the country, and so is the case with the southern part of the country also nowadays, where basically earlier this year, we witnessed the event where around Kochi, you had a garbage dump which caught fire. And the amount of smoke, the amount of pollutants that was released in that area was simply intolerable. So similarly, you have the municipal solid waste which are dumped into open grounds and have been done so for decades now in the region around major cities. Now, whenever you have dumping of the solid waste, let's suppose in a region you are dumping solid waste. Yes, the Brahmapuram sewage plant or Brahmapuram dump around Kochi. It was not a sewage plant, it was a dump. So here, if you are depositing or dumping the solid waste, means what? there will be some amount of organic, inorganic materials. All of them are mixed together. In India, hardly do we segregate the waste. Many of you, in your own household, if you reflect and think about it, let's suppose you are very disciplined and organized household. Think about all your relatives that you know and all your friends that you know. How many of them segregate organic and inorganic waste? Very few of them. In fact, in many of the smaller cities, you still have the kind of a practice, regardless of whether it is a vegetable waste, regardless of whether it is a inorganic waste, a plastic waste, everything you throw in the same bucket, you bind it in a plastic, you throw it out for the God to take care of it, right? Or the government to take care of it. It is not your concern anymore. So here you have commingled waste. So here you have many of the organic matter which carries out decomposition. Decomposition is initiated, right? Now that process of decomposition releases gases such as methane, which is highly combustible, gases such as H2S, hydrogen sulfide, the very pungent smelling gas which is released, right? Now, as this decomposition happens, in this waste, so these are also pollutants in their own. Many of the furans, etc., and heavy chemicals are also released, by the way. Due to the weight of that waste, many of those liquid particles, they leach into the ground surface. They pollute the ground also for many, many days together, many years and decades together. But then, here you have many of the materials which have a low combustion point, that they can burn easily. Low combustion point means they can burn very easily. For example, few of the types of plastic. For example, dried leaves, right? Plant residues. They can burn very easily, very quickly. So as a result of that, during the dry seasons, during the dry conditions, other than these pollutants, these wastes, they start burning. Delhi would experience this almost every year. And if sometime, I don't know if any of you live around those areas, or if you have ever driven around the garbage mountains of Delhi, at a time when the garbage mountains would burn, it would be very similar to a kind of a natural disaster, a kind of a horror scene, if you can imagine, with everything covered in black smoke, where you won't be able to figure out what is there around 500 meters in front of you. You only have dark smoke covering, and you have matter falling on the road surface from the garbage burning which is happening. You will have residues of plastic, residues of leaves flying over with that hot wind and getting deposited. So when that burns, it creates a huge issue. So municipal solid waste, natural dumping of it, as well as the combustion of it, leads to that issue. Now, what is the solution to it? The solution is very well embodied by a region such as Singapore. Now, Singapore is a place, is a country which is largely restricted around that city, right? It has got very high population density, by the way. Now, Singapore has got one of the best waste management practices. All the waste is collected, it is segregated, solid, liquid, biodegradable, non-biodegradable, and they take it to the waste to energy generation plant, where basically the biodegradable waste that is decomposed to turn into manures. Then the non-biodegradable waste, the inorganic waste, they are pulverized, broken into small amount, and then they are burnt. And with that energy which is produced, they produce electricity as a result of that. Now, that is a good practice. Now, here also, I hope you are aware, almost every state follows this. Almost every state. Few states might be the exception. Almost after every election, you'll find that when the new government comes to power, or if the existing government is re-elected to power, you'll find that some of the ministers, some of the secretaries, they are taken to a tour, to a visit, that these delegates have gone to Singapore to study about how to manage waste. The irony of the matter is that they spend almost a month on the taxpayers' money, enjoy, have a good time in these regions. Singapore, some of them they send it to European nations, some of the state governments they reward it in some other regions, but they do send it. Now they enjoy, have a good time, they come back, they find it cannot be implemented here, and that's the end of it. However, in certain areas, for example, in Delhi, you had the construction of this waste to energy plant, which was done with a lot of fanfare. And this was established in the region of Okla. Now, this Okla is an industrial area near Faridabad in Delhi. Now, there, this waste to energy plant was established with much amount of fanfare. That now that we have this plant, the problem of pollution in Delhi is a thing of history. Now Delhi's air will not be polluted anymore. Now, the pollution happened next year also. The residents of Okla, they started complaining about health issues, respiratory illnesses. A committee was formed by the judiciary. They found out that this waste to energy plant is a source of pollution. It is actually polluting the air much more than what was the case earlier, because the machineries which were brought here, the process which was followed was not what is required. So the Supreme Court ordered this plant to shut down. That rather than cleaning the air, you are polluting the air. We could have the waste dump normally doing that purpose. Why do we need to spend so many hundreds of crores to establish that plant? So the government basically said that, okay, we will do some modifications and then we will operate the plant. Next year, as they operated the plant, again the Supreme Court ordered the shutdown because again it was found to be very polluting. It is only very recently that this plant has been allowed to function after spending multiple hundreds of crores. But you have to understand that waste to energy is the future. Waste to energy is required. That is where more research needs to be carried out. That is where we need to execute it and we need to implement it. The better we are able to innovate how to convert that waste into utilizable form of energy, better and more remunerative the future is going to be, because the waste generated by everyone is going to increase, because in our country the population is also increasing. Okay, XY in Indore also this is done. But see, in Indore, as is the case with many other parts of the country, in Indore the plant is running properly well, right? It is not the case that the plant has been ordered to shut down, right? You have many such waste to energy plants which are running perfectly well. But I highlighted this, I have put the image of this Okla waste to energy plant because that is a unique case, a kind of a hilarious example. Maybe 10 years down the line, if you sit down, you'll be laughing at all this, that why, what kind of things and decisions that we have taken in the past. But then this is actually what needs to be implemented going ahead into the future in a proper manner, not in a kind of a manner that the plant pollutes more. Okay. Kamal Pal, yes, sir, at Okla and bypass in Delhi it is prevalent. Yes, the region almost becomes, the visibility reduces to zero in that case. Now, the probable solutions. So, as many of you were saying, that you have the decomposer tablets, the PUSA decomposer tablets. Now, what it does, accelerates the microbial actions, accelerates the microbial action of decomposition and softens the stubble so that the land can be tilled and prepared. Right. So that is basically the case of PUSA decomposer capsule. Now here, this has got an application which implemented on a large scale can be beneficial. Then you have anti-smog towers and anti-smog guns. Now, anti-smog towers, these again were implemented in large scale at the time of Beijing Olympics in China. That is where India also gained a kind of an inspiration that if China can do it, we should also be doing that. So basically, the anti-smog towers, this is the structure of it. It operates on a very simple principle. It has got multiple different filters. So from a higher position or from a higher elevation, polluted air is sucked in. Now here in this tower, you will have significant thousands of filters, significant number of filters, and the air will be pushed through. So all the various pollutants, solid particles, contaminants, etc. will be trapped by these filters. Eventually, as the air becomes cleaner, that is where the air is then pumped out. Right? That is where the air is then pumped out. Now, again, in Delhi, you have two of these towers. The functioning of it is very costly. Maintenance is even more costly. That is why a couple of towers are always in a shutdown phase. Recently, you had a committee of experts who submitted their report that building more towers or to get rid of pollution in Delhi, you need to construct around thousands of these towers where the cost will be in terms of tens of thousands of crores. Maintaining them would be in terms of hundreds of crores, because the extent in which this can purify the air is restricted to a certain area. It is not as if you build a smog tower in the region of Connaught Place in Delhi and it will take care of the entirety of Delhi. No, it will have a restricted reach. It will have a limited extended reach. So that is where you'll find that it is not very effective over a large area. Then another thing that many of the governments have, or many of the cities rather, have started doing is anti-smog guns. Now, anti-smog guns, you'll find it deployed almost in all the major municipalities of the country early in the morning, where basically water is sprayed in the air. So you have very tiny droplets of water which is sprayed in the air, and the prime purpose is to get rid of the pollutants, the particulate matter, and get them deposited on the ground surface. So here, if you will observe these anti-smog guns, they appear, they are loaded onto a kind of a trailer attached to a truck, and basically they will have a structure of a cannon-like structure here, right? And from this, you have multiple tiny droplets of water which are sprayed into the air. Multiple tiny droplets are sprayed. The purpose is that these droplets will interact with the particulate matter, dust particles, etc. And they will be able to take them, fix them to the ground surface so that the air is no longer polluted. Right? So generally, it is attached to the back of a truck or a back of a moving vehicle. And that is where early in the morning, you will find these vehicles plying across the roads of your city. So that is basically your anti-smog guns. Okay. Now, this also has got a limited benefit associated. It will take care of the pollutant exactly near the ground surface, and that too only in the road areas. But it is not the case that the pollution is happening only in the region of the roads, right? The pollutants, they circulate also sometimes, so they spread over. So they have got a very limited reach. Both of them have got very limited reach. Then, excuse me, then you have hydrogen based fuel technology, or the alternative fuel, right? Green hydrogen, for example. Now, when we talk about hydrogen fuel or hydrogen as a fuel, so when you burn hydrogen, when you carry out the combustion of hydrogen, what is the output in that case, or the outcome in that case? So when you carry out combustion of hydrogen, it produces water. Very good, isn't it? It will produce water as a consequence. So this is a clean energy, right? What is green hydrogen? You would have studied in science and tech. So green hydrogen is basically the hydrogen which is produced by the process of electrolysis, where the energy is given from energy for that electrolysis process is provided by the renewable sources, right? For example, solar, wind, etc. When they provide the energy to carry out electrolysis to produce hydrogen as a consequence, that is what we regard as green hydrogen. So that is something which has to be promoted. The government has initiated various different action plans in order to do that, right? So here, produced by electrolysis, of water, where water is broken down into H2 and O2. But what makes it green hydrogen, or why it is referred to as green, is basically because of the fact that energy required for this electrolysis, for this process, is supplied from renewables. Okay? I hope, Baldev, that is understood. So, that is what is green hydrogen. Now, green hydrogen, its production is being implemented, but you need the machines, the transportation sector, etc., to also adapt to it. You need to have a proper supply chain which needs to be developed as per it, as per the requirement. Only in that case will you have the proper utility of it. But that brings a larger agenda into picture, that one needs to have a kind of an alternate fuel technology which one needs to be working upon continuously. Then the vehicle policy. Vehicle policy can be broken into two parts. One is emission standards, and the second is scrappage policy. Emission standard, as in, you need to have the latest and the upgraded emission standard, right? So that emission standard means the amount of air that you give out, right? That needs to be clean. So, for example, when you go for Bharat Stage 4 or BS4, Bharat Stage 6, these are the emission standards that are set by the government, which the industry is mandated to follow, whereby you will have a better catalytic converter, ability to trap more amount of pollutants, and basically discharge little amount into the air, right? Best technologies in the world are available. We need to innovate in this. We need to be the global trend setter. We need to set up more technological innovation centers where we work upon this, right? Remember the backlash that the entire administration faced when you had the government mandating that rather than Bharat Stage 5, we need to adhere to Bharat Stage 6 norms, right? Directly, there was a jump from Bharat Stage 4 to Bharat Stage 6. And that is why you had the minister, Nitin Gadkari, who is now basically being lauded for that he stood firm on his ground. The automobile sector was up in arms against him. That what you are saying, for us to develop, we need to develop modern engines, we need to do this, we need to do that. That is simply not possible. The argument from the side of the government was very simple, that already that technology exists and is being applied in Europe. Why can't you deploy that technology in India? And that is when the industry eventually, when you give them no choice, they will have to sell the vehicles. They said that we will sell the vehicles at a larger price. Fair enough. At least keep the air clean. Right. So this came on the backdrop of, again, a very interesting anecdote which happened during this time of Delhi pollution few years back, where the Supreme Court basically issued a kind of a random order. As I told you, during these months, everybody panics. From the judiciary to the executive to the state to the central government, everybody is in a mode of panic. So the government in power, along with the Supreme Court, they had issued an order that every vehicle which is having a capacity or engine capacity of more than 2000 cc should be banned on the roads of Delhi. So the larger vehicles, the SUVs, the trucks, etc., they should be banned because they are polluting. Now, at that point of time, coincidentally, the chairperson of Mercedes-Benz was in India, and he issued a statement which created a lot of political furor, where it started trending to boycott Mercedes as if you can make a dent in that. But basically, he said that, look, in our vehicles, the air that we are taking in is much more polluted than the air that we are giving out. Our exhaust air is much cleaner than the air of Delhi. So that is where the government, over a period of time, also became much more surer that we need to have cleaner exhaust. And for that, you need emission standards. Secondly, scrappage policy, the vehicle scrapping policy. What is scrappage policy? That after a few years, vehicles should not ply on the roads. There is no point of driving vehicles which have been procured in the 80s or the early 90s, where the technology is around 2 to 3 generations older. So there you need to scrap those vehicles. You make the re-registration of them much more difficult, right? You make periodic maintenance and periodic check mandatory. Only then will you be able to remove those vehicles from the road. Otherwise, still you will find many of the vehicles which appear to be procured during the early 80s or the mid 90s, and everything in that vehicle is about to move other than the vehicle itself. So that is where these are the polluting areas. And if you scrap the older vehicles, that will boost the economy also. Understand that. Scrapping the older vehicles will always boost the economy, because when you scrap the vehicles, you will have scrappage yards that you will build. In these scrappage yards, you will have people who will find employment. Now, the older vehicles, they will be scrapped for the parts, the steel, aluminium, etc. That will be utilized. Now, that will be recirculated, right? That will be recycled. That means the price for the newer vehicles will come down, because the newer vehicle manufacturers, they can procure the steel and aluminium from there. So the newer vehicles, the price will come down. And when you are recycling, let's suppose steel, if you recycle steel, the amount of carbon emissions cost is much lesser as compared to manufacturing new steel. So it is eco-friendly as well. And in the process, you can keep the, when people will discard the older vehicles, they will buy the newer vehicles. So the automobile sector will also grow. So the scrappage policy has got multiple benefits. It just needs to be implemented on the ground. And then you have GRAP, Graded Response Action Plan, which is already in existence in many places, but it needs to be well established. What is this? So that is basically an indicator that if the pollution level is at this extent, we need to carry out these particular preventive measures. For example, shutdown of the schools, shutdown of, let's suppose, the colleges. If the pollution level goes higher up, we will shut down the industries in that region. If the pollution level goes even higher up, we'll ban the vehicles in that region, and so on. Now, in Delhi, all the actions that we take, when do we take that? When the air quality index exceeds 500. That is when we start panicking. You know, in Paris, as soon as the AQI levels, the air quality index levels, they cross 50, vehicles are banned in that area. Vehicles are not allowed to move in that area immediately. But in our country, if you implement that, immediately there will be a furor, right? There was a move to make some central portion of Delhi free of vehicles, the Connaught Place region, so that vehicular movement will be less, pollution will be less. Immediately, not only the people, but the shop owners, they were up in arms that this is authoritarian, etc., etc. Because our customers, they come in these vehicles, they park the vehicles near our shops so that they can carry on those goods into their vehicles, and then they move. So that is why you have your own set of problems in the country. But then this is again something which we will be experiencing, we will be passing through for the 10-15 years period, 15-20 years period. After that, there is a brighter and a cleaner future ahead. Okay, so that is where GRAP is basically where, for example, if I show you, or I'll show you about it tomorrow, for every different level of pollution, you should have a kind of an action plan, a standard operating procedure. That's what you need to do. Okay, that is GRAP. So, for example, AQI levels go beyond 200, shutdown of the schools, of the primary schools. If it goes above, the pollution level goes above 300, shutdown of the industries nearby. Pollution level goes above 400. So that is graded action plan. For each level of pollution, you have your own action plan. Okay. So that is where we'll end the session here. I hope the session was helpful and you extracted some positive thing out of it. We'll meet again tomorrow where we'll continue with this discussion. And hydrogen-based fuel technology you will study in further detail, Sarita, in the portion of science and tech. Here I have just told you about the green hydrogen. Just like that, you have gray hydrogen, black hydrogen, you have blue hydrogen, different types of hydrogen, which you will study in detail in science and tech. Don't worry. And why government provides MSP on those crops which are unsustainable? Because they are unsustainable in Punjab. It is not that case that rice growing is unsustainable in West Bengal or in Tamil Nadu or in Assam. So why will the government take a decision on the MSP to be implemented on a large scale only based upon the farmers in Punjab? They can't do that, can they, Devansh? And Chandrasekhar, instead of the government fining the farmer, why don't government direct them for crop? They have. They have basically said that, but initiating MSP for every kind of crop, understand, it is very damaging economically. In the long run, it is not beneficial, right? We are already witnessing that in the case of maize. The MSP that we are providing to the farmers, the international prices are lower than that. So suppose I am the government, you are the farmer, I'm paying you 100 rupees to buy maize from you. So from my pocket, 100 rupees have gone into your pocket. Now, where will I get that money back from? I also need to earn that 100 rupees back. So where will I get that 100 rupees? If I am able to sell that maize somewhere in the international market or somewhere else at 100 rupees, believe it or not, the present situation in many of the crops is that the government is paying you 100 rupees, but is selling it in the international market at 60 or 70 rupees. So there is that loss. How much can you tolerate? So that is why it is not very sustainable. And scrappage policy will lead to inflation? No, not always. No. Because scrappage policy, when you scrap the older vehicles, you are recycling the steel, aluminium, then other rubber, for example. So that means that you are recycling them. Recycling of that steel will make it cheaper as compared to manufacturing of new steel. It will be eco-friendly also. And the government provides incentives as per the law. The government provides incentives to the new vehicle buyers if they are basically scrapping the old vehicle. So you are getting a newer vehicle at a lower price also in comparison. Okay. And how fly ash is emitted? So Rishan Dondor, basically the fly ash is emitted when you have the burning of the coal. So that is what basically emanates that ash. It is very light. And if the gas is, or if the flue gas is not treated, then that is emitted from the chimneys of these power plants. And Yashi, the explanation of concepts is not retained even sometimes after the revision of PPT. So how to grasp the concept? Try to write it down in your own words. In that case, if you are unable to retain the concept, after the class, after 2 to 3 classes, go through the PPTs and try to write it down. Don't leave it down that 5 months down the line, I will pick up the PPT again and I would be able to retain the concept. That is simply inhuman expectation out of yourself. Write it down somewhere. What are those concepts that you have gone through? Write it in your own words. You will never forget that. And how can we say that there is light at the end of the tunnel for Delhi pollution? As of now, it is very difficult to see light at the end of the tunnel because we can guarantee next year again, the same discussions will be prevalent. But then over a period of time, the farmers will be bound to go for crop diversification because of natural compulsions, because of the water scarcity in that area, because even operating tube wells will keep on becoming costlier. And believe it or not, a situation will come sometime ahead in the future. The situation will come where we won't be able to subsidize electricity at the same rate in the regions of these agricultural areas. We won't be able to provide MSP at the same rate, or so that is why the farmers will have to go for market mechanism. They will be bound to go for that market mechanism, right? And there will be a change of even the the infrastructure building, etc., after some time, it comes to a plateau. Okay. And Kajal, is black carbon, is it harmful for the eyes? Not that much. So those black carbon, if it starts getting deposited in your lungs, that is when it is harmful. Okay. Santosh, can I pick up my answer writing skills before mains exam if I start now? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Can we change MSP for change in crop pattern? Again, I will say that if it is voluntarily taken from the side of the farmers, that is much more sustainable an action. Okay. So that is where we'll end the session here today. We meet again tomorrow, where we continue